We see that it all starts on a war battlefield where a great, brutal war was fought. The whole battlefield is covered in blood and dead bodies. Right in the middle of that carnage, we see a man who is gasping for air. Blood is pouring from his mouth. He looks like he's about to die any second. We see that the holy sword of the order is driven deep into his chest, piercing straight through his heart. Seeing this, the soldiers erupt in celebration. They finally caught the man they call the devil of the continent. The man the whole world fears can barely stand on his feet now. He is the most powerful necromancer the world has ever witnessed, and his name is Necromancer Archimond. He realizes he is going to die soon. Then we see the great war that has been raging across every corner of the continent for the past 10 years. Countless lives have been lost. For his own defense, he risked everything, but in the end he lost the war. He admits that this is his complete and utter defeat, and it happened because of a single knight named Berkel Reinlot, the leader of the Northern Knights. Then we look at Berkel. He tells Archimond that he didn't do this alone. He was only able to reach Archimond and defeat him because many people sacrificed their lives and shed their blood before him. Only then did Berkel's sword finally reach him. For the sake of the world and the people's peace, Berkel tells Archimond to accept his defeat and give up. Hearing that, Archimond only gets angrier. He shuts Berkel down and says Berkel just stood there while people lost their lives to the plague. Archimond flies into a rage and tells Berkel that after everything that has happened, he still has the nerve to talk about peace. Berkel is worse than animals. In full rage, Archimond says he will kill every single one of those knights, every single one of those hypocrites with his own hands. Suddenly, a green aura starts to pour out of Archimond's body as he tries to stand. Seeing him do this, the soldiers standing there are totally horrified and shocked. They say he's using necromancy even in this state, and they back away in fear. They tell Berkel he needs to kill Archimond right now. Berkel tells them to stop the madness and stand still. Berkel says to Archimond, 20 million. 20 million people died because of the plague, and you used your necromancy to turn all 20 million of them into your dead army. That was the spark that started this war. Archimond mocks Berkel's words. He says he knows what Berkel is after. He says the people of Berkel's hometown were probably among those 20 million, and that Berkel came here for revenge. That is the truth. At first Berkel says nothing, but then he gives his true reason for being here. As he speaks, his sword starts to glow. He says he is fighting here for the future generation. For a moment, Archimond's body freezes. Berkel keeps going. He explains that he has left all his choices, his convictions, and his hope in the hands of the future generation. Archimond sees his own corrupt reflection in Berkel's eyes and thinks about how different they are. In front of him stands a righteous knight, the exact opposite of what a knight should be in Archimond's eyes. Berkel says he is doing all of this for the future generation and his descendants. After that, Archimond's strength finally gives out. He drops to his knees and tells Berkel to strike him. Berkel lets his holy sword fall to the ground. His companions try to stop him, but he draws another dark sword, points it at Archimond, and asks if Archimond has any last words. Archimond smiles and says necromancers don't die that easily. He's about to say more when we see a flash. With a single massive attack, Berkel cuts Archimond's head clean off his body. Archimond's head floats in the air for a moment, looking at Berkel in his final second. There's something mysterious in his eyes. When Archimond's head hits the ground, everyone present starts celebrating. We see Archimond, whose head is separated from his body but who stays awake for a few more moments. He says he's not happy about victory. What he hears is the sound of his head hitting the ground. In his last moment before his eyes close, he sees the people celebrating and sees Berkel too. Archimond says this is his end, the end of Archimond the Necromancer, and then he dies. With his death, the 10 years of the Great War and the rule of the devil of the continent come to an end. After that, we see a house where the weather is stormy. Heavy rain is falling with lightning flashing. In that stormy night, inside the house, two maids are looking at a baby. One maid says to the other, "Did you see that? The young lord just moved." Archimond watches, wondering what's happening here. In reality, he has been reincarnated on Earth as a newborn. His name is Klein. One of the maids shows the MC a portrait of a woman and says, "Young lord, this is your mother." The MC feels his newborn body is stiff. He struggles to make his body say something. The maids get happy, thinking the newborn is about to speak his first words, but the reality is different. The MC tries to command his dark army to be summoned, and he screams it out in the voice of a baby. To the maids, it's nothing but shocking. Then we see a massive bolt of lightning in the sky that lights up the huge mansion. From that moment, 15 years pass in the blink of an eye. We see the fountain outside the same mansion again. It's a bright, sunny day. A group of ladies is standing nearby, looking very surprised. We see a young man walking calmly toward them. One of the women says his face and hair look like a masterpiece made by the gods. Then we see his full appearance, a handsome boy with snow-white hair, hands in his pockets, walking toward them with a charming look. All the women are captivated by his handsomeness. Blushing at his looks, they say, "Young Lord Klein, what do you eat to look so divinely beautiful?" Just then, a voice comes from behind, "Found you." The girl's daydreaming ends when someone comes up behind the MC and dumps a bucket of water right over his head. After pouring the water on his head, the person calls it holy water and shouts, "Begone, evil spirit," because a moment ago the MC's face looked like Archimonde's to him. This is a priest of the Holy Order named Garrison Berkman. Garrison says that 3 people have already fallen under Archimonde's influence and the evil spirit. Good thing he purified the MC in time. The MC asks Garrison if he isn't tired of this nonsense of purification rituals after all these years. Garrison explains that it's not nonsense. Archimonde's soul still exists inside the MC's body. That's why they periodically purify the evil spirit inside him. The MC turns around to face Garrison and says he is Archimonde. Garrison looks at his face and performs the purification again, saying, "There's Archimonde's face." The MC thinks for a moment and asks Garrison if he's seriously gone mad. He immediately curses and moves away from Garrison. Hearing that, Garrison sends his followers after Klein to catch him. The MC runs to save his life, shouting, "I'm not Archimonde. My name is Klein, Klein." Garrison says that for the MC's insolence, he will have to take a bath in holy water and naked too. Then we see the MC recalling the last moments of his past life. He says he never imagined things would change like this. When Klein shouted Archimonde's necromantic formula out loud as his first words in front of everyone, people started looking at him like he was a demon. At the age of 3, they locked him in a monastery. After that, he met a person who called himself a priest of the Holy Order. The MC turns around and looks at Garrison. Garrison says, "Archimonde, no, I meant young Lord Klein." The MC has no idea this is just the beginning. Then we see Garrison's 24-hour prayer songs that the MC has to listen to every morning as soon as he wakes up. It makes his ears bleed. Next comes Garrison's frozen garlic bath, where he chants mantras while bathing the MC in ice-cold water. After that comes Garrison's purification fire show, where he ties the MC to a spot, lights a fire around him, and chants to purify him. The MC's condition gets terrible. He goes through all this torture in the name of purification rituals and screams for someone to save him from this hell. 5 years later, we see the MC, completely exhausted from all of it. He's wearing a cap on his head. We see a girl praying to God that young Lord Klein will live his life like a descendant of a hero and soon become a healthy member of the family. The girl is Klein's personal maid, named Erin. Surrounded by all these holy prayers and this environment, the MC loses his patience. Angry, he throws the party hat from his head onto the floor of the room. Erin doesn't like that. She says the MC threw away the hat she made. Hearing that, the MC feels a little regret. He thinks he got too emotional. Erin must have worked hard with her small hands to make it. He apologizes to Erin and says he's sorry he went too far, and he goes to pick it up himself. Then Erin tells him she didn't make the hat. Priest Garrison did. Hearing that, the MC stops in his tracks. He picks up the hat in anger and looks behind him, and there stands Priest Garrison. Tears of joy are in Garrison's eyes because the young lord is wearing the hat he spent the past week making. He gets emotional. Hearing that, the MC tears the hat Garrison made. He says he's not going to wear it. Garrison doesn't like that at all. He shouts that Archimonde's evil spirit has returned to the MC. The MC says, "Archimonde, my ass." At that moment, the room's door opens. Leader of the Red Chariot Knights, Dunkel, walks in and asks Garrison if the purification ritual is over. Dunkel says the rumors about the young lord being Archimonde are now 10 years old. The Order has already said there's no issue with it anymore. Hearing that, Garrison immediately releases the MC from his grip and goes to talk to Knight Dunkel. The MC looks at Garrison in anger and realizes Garrison doesn't listen to him. Garrison goes and speaks to the knight in a polite, professional way. The MC thinks Garrison is good at playing social games. As he walks off, Garrison says he'll be back soon. Looking at the MC, he says they'll always have a what-if situation where anything could happen in the future. As he leaves, he steps back out the door for a second, comes back in, says goodbye, and tells the MC the next purification ritual will be next Friday. He tells the MC to keep his body and heart pure for it. Hearing that, the MC angrily tells him to get lost. The MC is completely fed up. He goes and sits on a sofa and says a priest shouldn't torture a child like this. Is Garrison even a priest? He looks more like a macabre demon. Just then, Erin comes in and asks the MC, "Young master, you really are Archimonde anymore, right?" She hands him a towel. The MC replies that he's definitely not Archimonde. Just hearing the name makes him angry now. In his mind, he thinks he is Archimonde, but if he admits that, who knows what kind of torture he'll have to face next. He needs to recover from all of this as fast as possible, but right now his main problem is these purification rituals. Since he was reborn, he's lived under constant surveillance by others, because of the rumors that he was Archimonde as a child. They kept him locked in the monastery for 7 years. The MC scratches his head hard and says, "Damn it. I thought I finally made it back to the duchy, but that priest has made my life hell." Knight Dunkel, standing behind him, says that because Garrison is an agent, he must have his reasons. Erin asks Dunkel, "Agent, is he some kind of important person?" Dunkel explains that it's a title given to the strongest member of the Holy Order. Aside from the Duke, no one in this family can face him. He's overwhelmingly powerful. Hearing that, Aaron feels good and gets excited that the young master's family is so strong. Then Knight Dunkel asks Aaron if there's anything else she's curious about. She asks who was the strongest Duke in the family's history. The MC is drying his wet hair with a towel. Dunkel answers Aaron that they were all incredible, but in his opinion, the current 7th Duke is the strongest. Hearing that, the MC cuts him off and says seriously, the 1st Duke. Hearing that, Dunkel says the MC's father is also very strong. This time the MC clearly rejects that. He says the 1st Duke is the strongest. There's seriousness on his face and a depth in his eyes. Then Dunkel says, "All right, young master, as you say." Aaron tells Dunkel she already told him that the young lord likes the 1st Duke the most. She says he's still staring at the 1st Duke's portrait. Dunkel smiles proudly and says that if you think about it, the 1st Duke founded this house 200 years ago. The MC is looking at the 1st Duke's portrait and thinks, 200 years. He still can't believe that he, the Necromancer Archimand, has been reborn as a descendant of the 1st Duke, Berkel Rhineland, the very man who killed Archimand with his own hands. Then we see Archimand in his past life, at his final stage, consumed by rage. Berkel tells him he's come here to save the future generation and beheads Archimand. In his last moment, Archimand looks at Berkel's face before he dies. In the next instant, we see Klein jolting awake from such a horrific dream. He lets out a shaky breath and thinks to himself how awful it was. Archimand says, "My name is Archimand, the legendary necromancer known as the Devil of the Continent. But all that is in the past now. In my anger and rage, I nearly destroyed an entire continent, and then I was killed by the Northern Knight, Berkel Rhineland, with his sword. When I opened my eyes again, 200 years had passed, and I was reborn as one of his descendants with all my memories intact." Klein runs a hand through his snow-white hair and remembers who he used to be. At that moment, the room falls completely silent at the sound of a voice. Young Lord Klein is talking in his sleep. It's Priest Garrison. He smiles at Klein and says, "Are you dreaming again of the time when you were Archimand?" Klein thinks Garrison is insane because Garrison is convinced that Klein is Archimand and he's been torturing him for years because of it. So Klein has to act dumb in front of him. Before Klein can make an excuse, his red-haired maid, Aaron, bursts into the room and causes a scene. "I heard everything you were saying in your sleep," she shouts. She starts yelling at the top of her lungs. "You were saying in your dream, destroy the continent, kill them all. I, Archimand, command you." Klein's blood runs cold. He tells Aaron to watch her mouth or this will get a lot worse. He turns to Garrison and says Aaron's lying, none of that happened. Just then, head butler Berkman arrives and says the swordsmanship demonstration is about to start. But after hearing Aaron's report about Klein, Garrison thanks her and says it looks like young Master Klein's purification rituals will need to be doubled. We see Klein, furious at Aaron for what she said. He glares at Garrison with a creepy, angry look. Then we see the large mansion. Inside, young Master Klein, Aaron, and head butler Berkman are heading together to the swordsmanship demonstration. Klein asks Berkman about it, and the head butler says yes, the Duke ordered that young Lord Klein should attend properly this time. Klein thinks his father wants to see him there. Aaron hands Klein a packet of cookies and asks, "Young Lord, may I have one?" The head butler tells her she's being rude to young Lord again. Klein takes out a cookie for Aaron and tells Berkman not to be so harsh with her. He gives her the cookie, saying, "Look how much Aaron likes this." Aaron finds the cookie delicious. The conversation shifts back to the demonstration. Klein asks what's actually going on. His father has never invited him to a demonstration before. Berkman explains that collateral branches of the family have come to meet them. Collateral branches are relatives not directly connected to the main bloodline. Klein scoffs. "Collateral branches, huh? Looks like more people have shown up to bother me." As soon as Klein enters the hall, a group of people immediately start talking about him. One of them teases him using his past life name, Archimand, just to mess with him. They all quickly start making fun of him. One boy says, "Word spread across the whole empire that Klein was left to rot in a monastery for 7 years. Got any stories about that?" Another boy chimes in mocking Klein. "You should watch what you say or Klein might curse you." Klein thinks these are his maternal cousins. On the other side, he sees more cousins and thinks they're only here to show their faces for free. Then we see a girl, Klein's cousin from his mother's Western family. She sits among the cousins, flaunting her superiority, her eyes scanning and judging everyone in the room. Klein ignores all the insults and keeps walking. He passes a group where one boy finally loses patience and says, "What do you think you are, ignoring us like this and just walking past?" Klein replies, "Someone like you, a piece of trash, has no place in my Rhineland family." The two nobles get angry. "We're your superiors," they snap. "How can you talk to us like that?" Klein says he doesn't even remember their names. Then Klein explains why these strangers from the collateral branches are acting so bold. There's only one reason. The family he was born into is falling apart. Suddenly, the crowd's attention shifted toward the arena where two young swordsmen were locked in an intense sparring match. A youth with purple hair lunged forward, pouring his nervous energy into a desperate strike against his opponent. However, the pressure was too much. He buckled under the counter-offensive and tumbled backward, hitting the ground in defeat. Seething with humiliation, the purple-haired boy demanded that his opponent stop hesitating and actually fight him with everything he had. The golden-haired boy standing over him blocked the subsequent flurry of attacks with effortless grace, a confident and calm smile playing on his lips as he declared the match was already over. This was the prodigy Delan Reinland, Clean's older half-brother, whose sheer aura of superiority made it clear. While he was the one upholding the family's prestigious name, Cleans watched the exchange closely, his eyes beginning to glow with a faint, mystical purple hue as he activated his magical sight to dissect their abilities. Driven by desperation, the opponent attacked again, swearing that things would be different this time. Dalan surged forward, his sword becoming a blur. While the opponent tried to counter at any cost, Don maintained absolute control, weaving through the strikes and dodging a downward slash with fluid ease. Suddenly, Delan became enveloped in a brilliant golden energy, his movements accelerating beyond the human eye as he prepared a special technique. Cleans recorded every detail, using his eyes to analyze Delan's footwork, the shifting of his weight, and the precise moment he used the tip of his toe to propel himself forward with explosive force. The purple-haired rival, blinded by rage, attempted a final decisive blow aimed squarely at Delan's face. Clans watched in awe as even the hidden flow of mana within the family's secret art was revealed to his gaze. In a split second, Delan unleashed an explosive strike, the famous meteor sword technique, hitting his opponent dead center. The judge immediately halted the bout, declaring Delan the victor. Ever the polite superior, the blonde youth offered a gentle, friendly smile, though he noted that his opponent would have been seriously injured had the strike landed with full intent. As the guests whispered in wonder at the execution of such a high technique, Clemens realized the display was a calculated warning to the secondary families. Don then spotted his younger brother and approached with a mocking grin, asking if he had been watching for long and teasing that he would have tried even harder had he known Cleanse was in the audience. Looking at his brother's perfect skill and his mask of false kindness, the ancient villain felt a wave of genuine disgust, all while wondering what the true motive was behind the gathering of all these branch families. The atmosphere in the grand hall shifted instantly as the presence of the seventh head of the clan. Kanklin was felt by everyone. Clans felt a jolt of alarm as his father approached, the room falling into a heavy, suffocating silence. The Duke offered a rare nod of approval toward his eldest son, recognizing the immense effort Delan had put in to reach such a high level of mastery. The former Archmage watched this exchange with a cynical eye, realizing that Delan was the sole source of pride for the Duke and the entire family. Commander Dunnell chimed in, noting that Delan's domain over the blade was truly extraordinary for his age. Ever the performer, the blonde youth bowed his head with feigned humility, claiming he still had much to learn. As the patriarch walked past, he spoke briefly of the heroic legacy they carried, and Delan bowed in deep, devoted respect. Then the Duke turned his gaze toward Clanes, a gaze that was frigid, sharp, and dripping with undisguised contempt. Without a single word of affection, the Duke stared at the boy, his silence broadcasting the shame he felt over this failed heir. Then, to the shock of the assembled guests, the leader reached out and touched the silver-haired boy's head, only to coldly declare that he felt not a single spark of mana residing within him. Cleans lowered his head and offered a quiet apology, fully aware that in this world, a noble without magic was considered little more than dead. Wait. Commander Dunnell stepped in to defend the boy, suggesting that the years spent isolated in the monastery had simply stunted his development. However, the damage was done. The crowd began to whisper maliciously, gossiping about the heir who possessed no mana at all. They muttered that if the main line had become this useless, it was time for the branch families to seize control. Walking away through the long corridors, Cleans told himself he could endure the insults thrown at his person. But then he remembered Burkle's famous words about protecting the future, clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white. A tidal wave of rage surged within him. The former Archmage found it a bitter irony that he had lost his life to a man whose lineage had devolved into such pathetic trash. As the guests began to depart, the mockery didn't stop. Zoltan, the purple-haired youth from the branch family, blocked Clemens's path and began to taunt him, asking how a highborn heir could be so incompetent that he didn't even know how to swing a sword. The meddler continued his tirade, branding the boy a disgrace to the Henland name. Remaining outwardly calm, Cleans looked at Dalton and saw him for exactly what he was, a talentless, busybody of zero value. When Dalton raised his fists in a fit of pique, Cleans casually called him both naive and incredibly stupid. Enraged by the insult, Dalton stomped the ground with violent force, preparing to strike. But in a flash of movement, the young heir swept Dalton's legs out from under him, sending the loudmouth crashing face first into the hard stone floor. Blood began to leak from Dalton's nose as he lay there, stunned, listening to Cleans coldly advise him not to take his frustrations out on others. Desperate and humiliated, Dalton screamed a final low blow, calling the silver-haired boy a motherless bastard. At those words, Clemens turned his head, his eyes igniting with a terrifying predatory glow of pure fury. Seeing that demonic expression, the coward froze, his skin turning pale as he broke into a cold sweat of genuine terror as he stared down the trembling boy. The former villain reflected that the real rot in this family was the disgusting superiority complex of people like Dalton. With a flicker of ancient magic beginning to stir in his veins, the Necromancer wondered just how much longer he would have to play. The part of the weakling, it was a bitter pill to swallow, seeing how far the clan had fallen. Cleanse recalled the divine radiant image of the hero who had slain him, and he couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for the pathetic state of Burkel's descendants. His grim reflection was interrupted by the arrival of the commander, whose voice boomed through the corridor, ordering the injured Dalton to cease his pathetic scandal. With a posture as unyielding as iron, the knight made it clear that he would no longer tolerate such blatant disrespect under his watch. Dalton gnashed his teeth in a silent, impotent fury, lacking the courage to talk back to a man of the commander's caliber. As he retreated, he threw a final snide remark over his shoulder, telling Clans he should be grateful for having such a protective bodyguard. The loser scurried away in a ridiculous hopping gait, leaving the commander staring after him in confusion, resting his hand firmly on the hilt of his sword. The knight assured Clemens that the area was now secure. The silver-haired boy watched his subordinate with a distant, unreadable expression before breaking the silence. He looked at the knight and asked quite simply if he had a spare sword he could borrow. Later that night, the two walked deep into a dark forest, the ground swallowed by a thick swirling mist. Halting their trek, the great warrior handed a heavy, cold steel blade directly to the boy. The commander questioned why the young master required a weapon at such an hour. The Cleanse remained silent, gripping the hilt and falling into a combat stance that mirrored his brother's. Seeing this, the guard decided it was time to head back to the mansion, deducing that the boy was likely just clinging to a desperate dream of becoming a swordsman. In his heart, the warrior felt a surge of pity. He knew that without a single drop of mana, all the effort in the world was futile. A person without magical power could never hope to become a knight of the Empire. Unaware of these thoughts, the boy began to swing the blade through the damp air, focusing entirely on his training despite his supposed inability to use the family's secret arts. Closing his eyes, the former archmage summoned the memories of the arena with crystalline clarity. He began to repeat the incredible footwork he had seen Delan execute, his body moving with a precision that defied his young age. With a perfect leap, he synchronized the timing of his impulse, flawlessly copying the genius technique. Suddenly, a volatile purple aura began to coil around the sharp edge of the blade. As he recreated the sword's trajectory with terrifying perfection, purple sparks began to hiss and crackle intensely around his glowing eye. Sensing a sudden violent shift in the atmosphere, the commander spun around, his breath catching in his throat. He stood paralyzed, unable to process the overwhelming aura of power radiating from the boy he had thought was a weight. In that heartbeat, the air unleashed a colossal strike of pure, jagged purple energy toward a massive boulder. But just as the power peaked, a sharp light tore through the boy's pupil, disrupting the flow of his immense power. The shadowy aura shattered, dissolving into the cold night wind like glass. Despite the interruption, the enormous rock was sliced clean in half, the smooth surface of the cut glowing faintly. The commander was left utterly speechless, his reality crumbling as he stared at the destruction. Cleans turned around slowly, his grip on the blade firm and steady. As surprised, knowing smile played on his lips as he realized that the ancient power he once wielded was finally beginning to answer his call once more. He had truly done it. He had replicated that powerful technique with chilling accuracy. Nearby, the young maid Erin stood frozen. Her jaw dropped in a state of complete and utter shock, unable to comprehend the sheer impossibility of what she had just witnessed. The commander wasn't faring much better, a single bead of sweat rolling down his temple as he stared at the severed boulder, his mind reeling from the realization that the mannerless boy was anything but. The scene shifted abruptly to the next morning, finding the young heir with his head plunged deep into a bucket of water. The commander stood over him, casually, noting that the boy could now hold his breath for well over a minute, gasping for air as he pulled his head back out. Clemens had to endure the knight's dry humor about his aquarium rituals. He shouted at the guard, who only laughed in response, though the knight's eyes sharpened as he admitted he had felt a distinctly sinister energy radiating from the young master's room earlier. As the maid began to dry the silver-haired boy's damp locks, a servant approached with a formal air bearing a sealed envelope. The messenger informed him that Dalton had sent a personal invitation. Cleans blinked momentarily, blanking on the name until the servant reminded him of the apology. Dalton wished The former archmage recalled the pathetic punch the boy had attempted and immediately scoffed. He knew an idiot like that wasn't looking for forgiveness. Gripping the parchment, the silver-haired heir felt his suspicion grow. Upon reading the contents, he discovered the invitation was for a hunting competition. A classic setup that practically screamed trap. It was obvious that his enemy just wanted a convenient excuse to drag him out into the wilderness away from the safety of the manor. When the messenger asked for his final word, Cleans looked up with a sharp, determined glint in his eyes, stating he saw no reason to refuse. He knew he held the ultimate advantage. As he glanced toward the sword leaning against the wall, he realized that his time spent obsessing over his brother's movements had revealed a terrifying new talent. He could copy any ability perfectly after seeing it just once. The commander moved to prepare the carriage for the upcoming hunt, insisting that he would accompany the boy to ensure his safety. He eyed Cleanse suspiciously, asking what kind of scheme the young master was cooking up this time. With a serious expression, the silver-haired boy reminded the guard of their previous conversation about the shifts in his power. The knight responded that for some reason he felt an entirely different weight in the air today. A dark, foreboding energy that seemed to follow them as the carriage began its bumpy journey toward the distant castle. The terrain was treacherous and uneven, causing the carriage to lurch violently as they entered the woods. Inside the cramped space, poor little Erin was turning a shade of green, clutching her stomach as she succumbed to motion sickness. She ended up slumped against the commander, who sighed and muttered that he had warned her not to come. Before offering a pillow for her to rest on, Cleans looked out at the dense foliage, explaining that the forest floor was always unforgiving. For those unaccustomed to its paths, the great warrior encouraged the girl to sleep it off, clearly moved by what he thought was the young master's kindness, only for Cleans to bluntly clarify that the pillow was strictly for Erin's comfort, not the knight's. Falling into a pensive silence, the white-haired boy stared out the window at the passing trees. He watched the ancient woods with a distant gaze, reflecting on how much the world had changed in 2 centuries. He remembered that 200 years ago, this very place had looked entirely different. The land, now lush and vibrant, had once been a desolate expanse, buried under heavy snow and the cold weight of the dead. The former villain gazed at the transformed landscape with a distant, pensive look, a flicker of begrudging respect crossing his mind as he realized that Burkle had truly succeeded in turning this graveyard into a better world. His reverie was broken when a guard swung the carriage door open, announcing their arrival at the sprawling estate of the Corwell family. Stepping out onto the gravel, Clemens looked up at the towering structure, surprised to find that the manor appeared even more opulent than his own Dougal residence. He dryly noted that for a mere children's hunting competition, the host certainly had an obscene amount of money to burn. Suddenly, a familiar grating voice pierced the air, calling his name from across the grounds. Dalton approached, flanked by a pack of lean, panting hunting dogs, and asked with a sneer what the silver-haired trash was staring at. He boasted openly that the luxury of the manor had been funded by wealth siphoned from Clean's his own family, punctuating the insult with a mocking laugh. Beside him, one of the massive hounds let out a low, guttural growl, strings of saliva dripping from its jaws. Cleans noticed the animals looked disturbingly thin, and asked with a flat tone when the competition would actually begin. Dalton dismissed his impatience with a wave of his hand, telling his rival to watch closely. In a display of calculated cruelty, he released the pack of hungry, ferocious dogs into the woods, explaining that he had hidden bait all over the mountain to lure in wild beasts. He bragged that a starving dog's sense of smell was 100,000 times stronger than a human's is. And as the hounds bolted into the brush, he raised his bow. The dog sprinted with jaws agape, driven by primal desperation, only to be struck down by Dalton's arrows as they reached the bait, yelping in agony as the boy laughed at his own twisted success. Horrified by the senseless violence, little Erin stepped forward to defend her master's honor, but Dalton merely recognized her as the brat Cleanse always dragged around. He reached out ostensibly to pat her head, but his expression shifted into something truly sinister as he asked what a useless girl like her could possibly offer. With a sudden jerk, he grabbed Erin's arm with bruising force, pulling her toward him. Before he could do more, Clemen's hand clamped around Dalton's wrist like a vice. His eyes ignited with a cold, predatory fury as he warned Dalton to take his hands off her, or he would snap his arm where he stood. Shocked by the raw strength in the boy's grip, Dalton tried to swing a desperate punch at Cleans's face, but the heir dodged the blow with an agile, effortless tilt of his head, sneering to mask his fear. Dalton leaped onto his horse and challenged Cleans to follow him into the heart of the hunt. Cleans mounted his own steed and ordered the commander to stay behind and protect Erin, promising to return shortly. However, the knight stood his ground, revealing a magic scroll tucked into his belt. He explained it was a signaling charm that worked by being torn, a rare tool that required no mana to activate, ensuring he could come to the boy's aid at a moment's notice. Cleans gave a sharp nod. He knew Dalton's father was a suspicious man, and if he were to vanish into the deep woods, it would likely be part of a much darker plan than a simple game of shadows. The situation had reached a boiling point. Before spurring his horse forward, Clint looked back at the commander with a gaze that held far more weight than a typical teenager's, telling him to tear the scroll the moment things went south. He assured the knight that a great storm would rise in his hand if that happened, a cryptic promise that left the warrior watching in silence as the young master vanished into the shadows of the trees. Time bled away as night fell over the forest, turning the woods into a labyrinth of tangled branches and silver moonlight, riding deep into the darkness. The former archmage mused that his rival couldn't have hidden himself too far off. Finally, he broke into a clearing and found Dalton waiting for him, a twisted silhouette against the backdrop of a massacre, surrounded by a circle of slaughtered animals. The purple-haired boy sneered, asking why the illustrious heir had taken so long to find him. Cleanse dismounted slowly, his eyes scanning the bizarre and gruesome scene. The lifeless bodies of the hunting dogs were scattered around Dalton like macabre decorations, their blood staining the dark earth. Dalton rose to his feet with a manic glint in his eye, declaring that they had finally reached the grand finale of their competition. Drawing his sword, the enemy revealed his true intentions. Cleanse himself was the final prey. He threatened to slaughter the boy and deliver the news of his tragic accident to his elder sister as a trophy. Dalton began to mock the Heinen family name, calling it a hollow, ridiculous joke of a bloodline. With a malicious grin, he signaled for his backup. Suddenly, hooded figures emerged from the darkness like ghosts, their bows drawn and aimed squarely at the white-haired boy. They cursed him for his bad luck, telling him he had simply been born into the wrong family at the wrong time. The silver-haired boy stood perfectly still, observing the ambush with a look of detached, icy boredom. Dalton continued to boast, claiming that by tomorrow the entire continent, who would be gossiping about the fall of the legendary sword family, and that the young master would be nothing more than scraps for the forest scavengers in the face of this certain death. Cleans found his mind drifting back to Burkel's annoying, noble words about protecting the future. A small mocking smile twitched on his lips, which only served to irritate and confuse Dalton. Then, to everyone's horror, the boy began to laugh. A deep hysterical cackle that echoed through the trees, sounding far too ancient for his small frame. Dalton recoiled, asking if the silver-haired freak had finally lost his mind. Clint covered his face with his hand, unable to stop laughing at the pathetic irony of the situation. When he finally looked up, his eyes were no longer human. They glowed with a piercing blood-red light. He addressed Dalton as a cheeky brat, his voice dripping with a newfound authority. The purple-haired boy froze, sweat pouring down his face as a primal terror took root in his soul. Cleans's voice grew cold as he reminded them that this family had been built upon the foundation of his own death, and he would not allow such insects to profane it. A violent, shadowy blue aura exploded from his body, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Dalton screamed, assuming it was some hidden magic. Cleanse corrected him with a wicked grin. This wasn't magic. It was pure demonic energy, the raw essence of the necromancer of old. The henchmen panicked, their weapons trembling as they whispered in terror, wondering what kind of monster they had truly cornered. High above the ground, suspended by his own dark power, Cleanse reached into the void of history, summoning the ancient, buried evil spirits to rise and act. In his name once more, the dark energy twisted and coiled as the former archmage commanded his creations to devour everything in sight. From the depths of the shadows, a colossal skeleton emerged, its towering frame looming over the battlefield. His Cleans ordered the creature to consume all that stood before it. Zan let out a panicked scream, refusing to believe his eyes as he recognized the terrifying army of the undead from the legends of Ashaman, the ancient demon king. With a chilling predatory smile, the protagonist pointed a finger at his foes, sealing their fate. In a sudden rush of memory, he recalled how he once thought he had forgotten the man he used to be. But he had spent 200 long, agonizing years alone, nestled within a mountain of bones and skulls. It had been an eternal cycle of days spent in total darkness, where the only thing he could feel was the persistent echo of the dead calling out to him from the bottom of the abyss. That resonance was a nostalgia he could never truly escape. It was the sensory anchor that reminded him of his true identity. Back in the present, the air grew thick and heavy as massive. Dark clouds choked the moonlight from the sky. Zalton continued to shriek that this couldn't be real, chanting the forbidden name of the Archmage in a fit of terror. Clint simply smiled, confirming that yes, that was indeed the name the world used to tremble at. The henchmen, initially paralyzed, began to murmur amongst themselves, questioning if the tales of the Demon King were actually just myths. They watched as the giant skeleton stood their ground, their eye sockets igniting with a fierce blood-red light that pierced the gloom. However, the mercenaries soon found their courage again, erupting into mocking laughter. They called the skeletons trash, boasting that they had dismantled hundreds of such undead creatures on previous missions. One mercenary even joked about taking a bone home as a souvenir, while their leader barked orders to clear the path and eliminate the boy standing at the center of the storm. A man stepped forward, hoisting a massive, heavy crossbow and aiming it directly at the silver-haired youth. With a sharp command to fire, a rain of arrows and bolts whistled through the air, arching across the dark sky toward the protagonist and his undead legion. The projectile storm closed in with lethal speed, reflecting and cleans his eyes as they approached to pierce his flesh. But just as the first arrow should have struck home, the entire volley froze in midair, as if colliding with an impenetrable, invisible wall. Dalton let out a triumphant shout. Convinced that the air had been turned into a pincushion by the barrage, his celebration was short-lived, however. As the dust settled, he gasped in horror to see Clem standing completely unscathed. Massive spectral shields had manifested magically in front of the skeletons, catching every single arrow. The army of the dead remained unmoving and perfect, a silent wall of bone and magic that stood ready to turn the hunters into the hunted. The skeletons now stood formidable, equipped with heavy shields that had manifested to blunt any further assault. Clans gazed at his foes with a mixture of pity and disdain. Musing aloud that 200 years was a long time, long enough for the world to forget the true terror of his legions. The henchmen spiraled into a panic, their eyes bulging at the sight of shields, appearing out of thin air in the bony hands of the monsters. The air explained with a chilling calm that while common skeletons might be fragile, his were forged of a different caliber entirely. But with a confident, razor-sharp smile, he declared that his undead were unlike anything they had ever faced. This revelation, paired with the boy's absolute composure, sent Dalton deeper into a state of paralyzing dread. Cleans then issued a cold command to his first unit: break their formation, advance. He vowed to crush with his own hands those who dared to mock the future of the North. And with that final word, he sent his troops forward with overwhelming force. The giant skeletons surged across the clearing at a speed that defied their skeletal frames, catching the mercenaries completely off guard. The enemies gasped, wondering how mindless piles of bone could move with such predatory agility. With a silent bone-chilling battle cry that echoed in the minds of the living, the army of the dead plunged into the fray. The mercenary leader screamed for his men to hold the line and suppress their panic, but his orders were drowned out by the sounds of violence. One of his subordinates was brutally struck by a skeleton, his body broken as he was sent flying. The massacre began in earnest. The woods were filled with the screams of dying men and the rhythmic clatter of bone. Zeton watched horrified. As the battlefield turned into a slaughterhouse of his own making without missing a beat, the young mage ordered his second unit, the crossbowmen, to sweep the area and eliminate the stragglers. High in the gnarled branches of the surrounding trees, skeletal archers shifted into position, their hollow sockets locked onto their targets with unnatural precision. The surviving mercenaries felt their blood run cold as they realized the undead possessed long-range capabilities. With a dry, direct command, the former archmage ordered them to fire without mercy. A volley of lethal arrows whistled through the dark air at incredible speeds. The mercenaries were struck down where they stood, the force of the bolts pinning them to the earth as they cried out in agony. One particularly resilient mercenary leader tried to fight back, parrying the heavy blow of a skeleton with his sword. In his desperation, he shouted that this was impossible, that no mere necromancer could command such coordinated power. He realized that if the battle continued this way, every single one of them would be utterly annihilated. Dalton, seeing his world crumbling around him, screamed for his men to listen, but his voice was lost in the chaos of the carnage. Skeleton crept up behind him, its jagged blade raised for a killing blow. Snarling in a fit of panicked rage, the purple-haired noble spun around and delivered a precise, powerful strike that severed the creature's head. For a fleeting second, he celebrated, thinking he had found the weakness of the monsters by targeting the skull. However, his triumph turned to ash as the headless body of the skeleton didn't fall. Instead, it continued its advance, swinging its weapon back at him with unrelenting force. Sultan recoiled in terror, realizing that the rules of life and death he knew did not apply to the puppets of the archmage. The villain stood frozen in a state of absolute disbelief, his mind screaming that a common skeleton should never be able to function without its skull. With a slow, mocking smile, the protagonist reminded him that he had already been warned. As the headless monster stood back up, it reached down, calmly retrieved its own skull from the dirt, and snapped it back onto its neck as if adjusting a piece of armor. Cleans explained that this unyielding resilience was the primary reason he had been able to sweep across the entire continent in his past life. The sight of the creature, self-repairing with its own hands, sent Dalton spiraling into a primal terror. The former archmage revealed the dark truth. Spirits summoned with pure demonic energy do not abide by the laws of mortal injury. They do not die easily. The surviving mercenaries were pushed past the brink of madness, wailing in despair as they realized they were fighting a war against an army that simply refused to stay down. Clem sighed, noting that with his current youthful body, he could only maintain 11 of these elite summons at a time. Before asking the trembling men if they truly wished to continue this farce, while the forest was being painted in blood, the scene shifted back to the peaceful gardens of the mansion, where the commander and the little maid Erin were sharing a laugh by the fountain. Erin giggled, imagining the stories of the young master's supposed misbehavior at the monastery. The commander watched her with a softened expression, noting how much she seemed to genuinely adore the boy. With her cheeks stuffed with treats, she nodded enthusiastically, declaring that she loved him more than anything. She asked the knight if he truly understood how incredible the young master was, describing him as the personification of kindness. Her words created a haunting contrast as she called him gentle. A mercenary was currently sprinting through the dark woods, shrieking in fear as she called him sweet. A skeleton was cleaving through a henchman with a blade of dark magic. She smiled brightly, claiming he was the warmest soul in the world because he shared his biscuits with her, while at that very moment, a cold, shadowy aura of death was suffocating the life out of the forest. Back in the thick of the carnage, the protagonist's gaze remained like chips of ice, devoid of the warmth Erin so fondly described. One of the mercenaries let out a final gurgling cry as a skeleton ended him, leaving only the purple-haired Dalton to defend himself. He was panting heavily, his muscles screaming with exhaustion as he swung his blade in a frantic arc. He managed to land a heavy blow, but the skeleton's bones knit back together instantly, leaving him in a state of utter hopelessness. In a fit of desperate rage, Zoltan realized that hacking at the puppets was a fool's errand. He concluded that the only way to stop the nightmare was to kill the puppeteer. If he could strike down the young master, the summons would surely vanish. With a roar of hatred, Dalton charged toward Clem, screaming his name. He declared that the macabre game of playing with corpses ended now, and that everything would be settled by the mage's death. He raised his sword for a final overhead executioner strike, pouring every ounce of his remaining strength into the blow, but Cleans didn't flinch. His eyes suddenly ignited with a brilliant purple light, his magical sight predicting the trajectory of the attack with crystalline clarity. To the ancient necromancer, the deadly lunge was moving in slow motion, a pathetic attempt from a child who didn't yet understand that he was challenging a god of the afterlife. Herbal energy crackled within Cleans's eyes, the violent sparks illuminating the darkness as he tracked every micro-movement of his opponent. Through his mystical sight, the archives of his memory opened, pulling forth a technique he had witnessed only once. He recalled with absolute precision the trajectory and the rhythm of the sword play his brother had displayed days ago in the arena. Dalton's eyes widened in paralyzing shock as he recognized the stance. It was the sacred secret art of the Heinen family. Cleanse unleashed the devastating meteor sword technique, his blade becoming a streak of falling light that collided with Dalton's weapon. With a sickening metallic snap, Dalton's sword was sheared in half, the broken steel spinning into the dirt, standing over his trembling foe. Cleans's voice dropped to a glacial whisper, informing him that his true punishment was only just beginning. As the dust of the skirmish began to settle and the night air grew unnervingly still, Cleans looked down at the defeated noble and conceded that Dalton had been right about one thing. If a summoner dies, his creations lose their power. Even the great Asheman had never managed to overcome that fundamental flaw. However, the former archmage reflected on a new irony. While his past self relied solely on demonic energy, it was the martial prowess of the Heinen bloodline that now fortified his weaknesses. The very blood of his ancient enemy running through his current veins had made him something far more dangerous than he had ever been before. Dalton, broken and confused, stammered a question, but he found his limbs unresponsive, his body a lean weight upon the earth. Cleans met his gaze with a look of absolute domesticity and supreme contempt, watching the light fade from the boy's eyes. With a final breath, Dalton collapsed and Cleans looked toward the horizon, whispering to the ghost of Burkle that he should wait, for he intended to rebuild this ruined house with his own two hands. Suddenly, Dalton jolted awake, but the forest was gone. He found himself submerged in a suffocating absolute darkness. He tried to move his hands, but they were anchored by the cold, heavy bite of thick iron shackles. Panic flared in his chest as he realized he was bound to a torture chair, its frame lined with cruel spikes and rusted chains. A shadowy figure emerged from the void, noting with a dry tone that the guest had finally awakened. It was cleansed, though he seemed transformed in this space. He revealed that they were in the place where souls are dragged after their light. Goes out a personal afterlife, crafted by the will of Asheman. Dalton's mind fractured at the realization that he was dead. Trapped in a dimension of the necromancer's making, Cleanse leaned in, his voice echoing with the weight of centuries. He reminded Dalton of his hobby, of the countless dogs he had starved and slaughtered, for the sheer sport of it, and the atrocities he had committed under the mask of noble tradition. The mage recalled the look of twisted joy on Dalton's face during those hunts, a memory that now served as the blueprint for his suffering. Dalton shrieked, demanding to be released, but his cries were swallowed by the abyss. A moment of clarity struck the villain. He remembered the feeling of Cleans's sword piercing him, yet here he sat, seemingly whole. Cleans clarified the nightmare. Dalton was indeed dead, and this wellness was merely a vessel for his karma. Whether the boy believed in the soul or the afterlife no longer mattered. The debt was due, and the hour had finally come for him to pay for every drop of blood he had ever spilled. Past sins had finally come to collect their due. Dalton's breath, hitched in a ragged sob as a phantom pack of hounds, materialized from the void behind the protagonist. Cleanse commanded his enemy to listen. Really listen to the cacophony of barks and snarls from the lives he had snuffed out. Fear entertainment. The ghost dogs lunged, their spectral jaws sinking into the villain's soul. He shrieked in a despair so profound it felt like his very essence was being shredded. The silver-haired boy stood over him, cold and unyielding, telling him to memorize this agony, for this was the hell he had built with his own hands. Dalton's pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears as he was ravaged by the victims of his own blood sport. Back in the physical world, Dalton's lifeless body lay sprawled in the dirt, covered in wounds that mirrored the spiritual assault. Clen sheathed his blade, his expression serene. Having finally purged the nuisance that dared to humiliate him, his skeletal legion gathered behind him, standing in silent, loyal rows. Looking at the hollow sockets of his servants, the young mage felt a flicker of ancient debt. He told his creatures that they deserved a reward for answering his call across the centuries, promising to break the curse of their eternal servitude. A brilliant emerald light washed over the clearing, and the skeletons began to dissolve into shimmering particles of mana. Cleanse watched in a heavy silence as they faded into the wind, reflecting on the cyclical nature of existence. He wondered once more why he had been pulled back from the void. In his philosophy, true death was when bones turned to dust and scattered without a trace. Yet here he was, flesh and blood once more. His introspection was cut short when a hooded figure stepped out from the tree-inn, admitting his surprise at seeing someone so young, wielding the forbidden art of necromancy. Clean's his eyes narrowed as he questioned the stranger's identity and how much he had witnessed. The man offered a cryptic, mocking smile, stating there was no need for names. With a flick of his wrist, a sickly green aura flared in his palm, and he began to weave a spell of his own. He claimed the boy wouldn't understand the scope of his mission, even if he explained it. And before Cleans's eyes, the dead mercenaries began to twitch and rise. Their eyes glowed with a stagnant green light, turning into mindless marionettes under the stranger's THR. The hooded man hoisted the corpses with his dark magic, noting that while Dalton had been a pathetic failure, his leftovers were still quite useful. With a final chilling laugh, the necromancer vanished into the mist, taking the reanimated bodies with him miles away at the mansion. The peaceful atmosphere had begun to sour. Aaron, the small maid, tried to coax the commander into listening to more stories about the young master's antics. But the knight remained frozen, staring at the emergency scroll in his hand with growing dread. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone horribly wrong. It had been 3 hours since the signal started to feel off, and his instincts were screaming of a trap. He moved to leave the estate to find Cleanse, but his path was suddenly barred by 2 grim-faced castle guards. The tension in the air snapped like a bowstring as the commander realized the conspiracy against the young heir went far deeper than a simple hunting trip. The guards at the mansion blocked the way with cold, impassive faces, stating that it would be a severe problem if the commander were to abandon his post now. The knight stood in a heavy silence, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the crest of the Corwell family emblazoned on their uniforms. It was the confirmation he needed. Dalton's family had been weaving this web of betrayal from the very start, preparing for the worst. The commander drew himself up to his full height and issued a final warning. He would no longer stand idle if they attempted to bar his path again. Intimidated by his overwhelming killing intent, the Corwell guards hesitated. The knight turned to Erin, the young maid, and told her to retreat to the safety of the manor with a priest who had accompanied them on the trip. However, one of the guards informed him with a grim expression that the priest had already departed long ago. Recalling Clemen's earlier warnings and sensing the dire urgency of the moment, the commander vaulted onto his horse. With the emergency scroll clenched between his teeth, he tore it onward her, certain that these events were no mere coincidence. He spurred his steed into a gallop, racing toward the forest as fast as the animal's legs would carry him, fearing what might have already befallen his master. Deep within the dark woods, the young protagonist stood his ground against the mysterious necromancer's legion of the walking dead. Beads of sweat rolled down his pale face as he realized his demonic energy had been nearly depleted in the previous struggle. His current youthful body was at its limit, and he could no longer call upon his own necromancy to defend himself. The hooded sorcerer, sensing victory, ordered his mindless zombies to swarm the boy without mercy. The undead horde lunged forward, but Klee simply smirked, mocking the Necromancer for thinking he could win merely by mimicking the arts of the past. Suddenly, the crest on the magic scroll in Kleen's hand erupted with a blinding celestial radiance. The encroaching zombies shrieked and recoiled, their rotted flesh contorting in agony as the holy light seared through the gloom. Kleen's laughed, taunting his foe with the news that he was now utterly finished. As the Necromancer watched in confusion, the ground beneath them began to pulse with a golden divine power that surged upward, consuming the shadows. From the heart of the radiance, the priest who had been traveling with the young heir appeared, his eyes burning with a fierce golden fire. With a voice like rolling thunder, he invoked the light to purify the abominations before him, turning the zombies into nothing more than drifting ash. He assured the young master that he could rest easy now, for the church would handle the rest. The stunned Necromancer demanded to know the identity of this newcomer, who wielded such overwhelming holy force. The priest met his gaze with a look of absolute determination and introduced himself as an exarch of the Holy Order. Exarchs were the church's supreme human weapons, 3 chosen warriors who swore to execute the absolute will of the Pope. They were the only ones capable of wielding the holy weapons left behind by St. Galligand, and it was whispered that a single exarch possessed the martial power of an entire fortress. The Necromancer trembled as the priest's holy aura began to physically crush the darkness he had conjured. Clans watched as the man he knew only as a simple priest revealed his true status as the strongest in martial prowess among the chosen 3. The exarch stepped forward, shielding the boy and promising to guard him against all evil. The remaining zombies, driven by the Necromancer's frantic commands, snarled and lunged with savage fury, but they were no match for the divine light. The exarch raised a sacred home, channeling his power into a baptism of fire that incinerated the undead where they stood. He commanded the sinners to listen and pray for their souls, before it was too late, his voice carrying the weight of a final judgment. With a powerful stomp of his foot, a shock wave of golden energy rippled through the earth, shattering the ground and hurling the undead puppets away like leaves in a storm, delivering a final crushing blow. The exarch declared this act to be his mercy, a final judgment for lost and corrupted souls. The Necromancer was sent flying by the sheer pressure of the attack, his mind reeling at the insanity of an exarch appearing in such a remote place. He spat a curse into the wind, realizing that his carefully laid plan had just collided with the most terrifying force the Holy Order had to offer. The hooded Necromancer spat at the ground, his voice cracking as he complained that such divine power was nothing more than a grand lie. Terrified, he turned to flee the clearing. But in his frantic escape, his mask slipped and fell to the forest floor, exposing his secret identity to the moonlight. He didn't get far. The exarch materialized in his path like a vengeful god, asking with a terrifyingly calm voice just where he thought he was going. The Necromancer shrieked as the priest's mental pressure invaded his very mind, crushing his will. Gasping for air that wouldn't come, the sorcerer listened as the priest whispered that the prayer wasn't over yet, that he should be grateful for the judgment the divine light was about to bestow upon him. In the name of the Holy Order, the exarch delivered a final purifying strike that reduced the man to a pile of gray ash. Kleens watched the execution with rapt attention, noticing one of the Necromancer's eyes roll across the dirt until it stopped at his feet. As he leaned down to pick it up, he reflected on the exarch's terrifying efficiency. With a single step and the mere pressure of his presence, the priest had obliterated over 20 bodies instantly. The sheer, overwhelming scale of that strength left even the former archmage deeply impressed. Suddenly, a blood-stained hand clamped on to cleanse his shoulder with bruising force. It was the exarch. His eyes narrowed as he looked the boy up and down. He remarked that he had rushed to this location the moment he sensed a surge of necromancy. But now that he was standing here, something felt incredibly strange. The priest's grip tightened as he noted that the aura of death he had detected didn't seem to belong to the boy yet. It had come from this exact spot. His gaze turned suspicious, sharp enough to cut, and Kleens felt a wave of tension wash over him. He knew he was standing on the edge of a precipice. He realized that if he made even one wrong move or said the wrong word, this holy man would eliminate him right then and there, without a shred of hesitation. The standoff was broken by the sound of thundering hooves as the commander arrived, shouting Kleens's name in a state of high alarm. Seeing his guard appear so quickly brought a flicker of relief to the protagonist, but the toll of the night had finally reached its peak. The strain of channeling even a fraction of his old necromancy was too much for his current fragile body. As his legs buckled and the world began to tilt, the commander leaped from his horse, catching his young master before he hit the ground. Desperate and worried, the knight asked what had happened, only for the boy to whisper that his strength had simply vanished. When asked about the fate of the hunting party, Kleens confirmed coldly that he had eliminated Dalton in the heat of battle. Nearby, a single white flower, now splattered with droplets of crimson blood, swayed gently in the silent dark wind of the forest. The scene shifted back to the mansion, where a heated inquiry was underway. The news of Dalton's death had struck like a thunderbolt, and Count Delin Cornwell, Dalton's father, slammed his fists onto the table in a blind rage. He refused to believe that his son, a man he praised for his knightly honor and loyalty, would ever try to assassinate the ducal heir. An investigator intervened, showing the Count a document that proved 20 of his own mercenaries were present at the scene. The Count's face paled as he realized his men had been caught, but he quickly pivoted to a new defense. He argued that it made no sense. Zan was a trained warrior, and everyone knew Cleans had no mana and couldn't fight to save his life. Desperate to save his reputation, the Count began to attack Clee's character, bringing up the bizarre rumors surrounding the boy's late mother. He accused the boy of hiring an assassin to kill Dalton and then framing him for the crime. Just as the Count's accusations reached a fever pitch, a powerful commanding voice rang out from the entrance, telling him to shut his mouth. Cleans walked into the room, noting with a dry smirk that there seemed to be no limit to the nonsense these men would speak. He stated clearly that he had acted in self-defense, and that the priest had assisted him against the true threat of the Necromancer. When the Count called him a liar, Clans met his gaze with an iron-willed stare, his eyes flashing with a faint mocking pink light. With a razor-thin ironic smile, he asked if his being Ashaman was now an established fact in their minds. The Count felt a sudden suffocating pressure, as the protagonist reminded everyone of the vow he made the moment he ended Dalton's life. A solemn oath to rebuild the crumbling foundations of the Heynen family with his own hands. The boy's voice carried a chilling conviction. He declared that he would rebuild the family with his own hands and would not allow any more vermin to obstruct his path. The heavy tension in the room was suddenly broken by a sharp knock at the door. A blonde woman entered, her presence so commanding that the air seemed to still around her. This was the commander of the Blue Spear Holy Knights, and her arrival immediately sent a ripple of unease through the assembly. Cleans recognized her instantly. She had been present at the sword exhibition, watching from the shadows. When a noble questioned her right to be there, the investigator clarified that Dalton had a long history of performing missions for her order, giving her a vested interest in the truth. She fixed Cleanse with a piercing, analytical stare that made the ancient mage within him instinctively wary. Without wasting time, the commander requested a private audience with the young master. Though the investigator hesitated, he ultimately allowed it, warning the boy not to be long. As Cleanse followed her toward a secluded room, his mind raced through the possibilities. He knew this wasn't a social call. It was either a suspicious confirmation or a dangerous test. He resolved to use her family, the House of Forever, as a stepping stone for his own grand designs, regardless of her intent. They reached a private study and the commander turned, her calm and strangely alluring voice breaking the silence. Without warning, she pressed the boy against the wall, her eyes locking onto his as she whispered an unexpected request. She wanted to touch him to see the truth. This woman was the eldest daughter of the Forever House, one of the 3 legendary pillars of the continent. Cleans recalled her fearsome reputation. Records described her in battle against savage orcs, where her blue eyes would glow with a lethal intensity as she danced through the fray with her spear. She was a living legend who had single-handedly annihilated Hyle monster orders, standing alone amidst piles of corpses as the undisputed protector of the civilians. Back in the present, her intimidating aura remained, even as she teased him. When Cleans hesitated, she snapped at him to stop pretending they were close. Despite their distant family connection, she reminded him that since she was the daughter of a first wife and he was from a different branch, they shared no true blood, meaning she felt no familial obligation to hold back her personal curiosity. The commander shoved him against the wall once more, her grip firm as she demanded to see his hands. Cleans shouted in confusion, asking what she was playing at, but she ignored his protests. She took his hand in hers, feeling his skin with a delicate yet firm touch. She noted aloud that his hands were as soft as a baby's, completely devoid of the calluses or scars that define a true swordsman. Her fingers slid over his tendons with clinical precision as she leaned in close, her breath warm against his face. She looked him in the eyes and asked the million-dollar question. If his hands showed no signs of sword mystery, what other power had he used to slaughter Dalton and 20 hardened mercenaries? Cleans shoved her away, retreating a few steps as a cold sweat broke out on his neck. He realized this woman was far more dangerous than the priests. She wasn't looking for a confession. She was looking for a reaction. He knew that in her world, silence was an admission and hesitation was a confirmation, deciding to go on the offensive. He flashed a mocking smile and asked her directly what she would do if he truly were the legendary archmage Ashaman. To his absolute shock, she burst into laughter. She looked him up and down and told him that a little pipsqueak like him could never be the terrifying demon king of old. The insult hit Clans harder than any physical blow. He stood there paralyzed and gaping, repeating the word pipsqueak to himself in utter disbelief that he, the most feared necromancer in history, had just been called short. He asked if she hadn't perhaps made a mistake, but her mocking grin remained unchanged. She confirmed it without a second thought, even offering to repeat herself. She called him Pipsqueak once more, and Cleans felt his temper flare at the sheer humiliation. Deep down, he knew her assessment of his stature was technically correct. But the emotional damage was done, and his dignity as the former Demon King was thoroughly shaken. To make matters more absurd, the commander made a bold, unexpected proposal. If he could defeat a knight without using a sword or his necromancy, she would kiss him. Clint was left speechless, his mind reeling from the audacity of the offer. Between his internal injuries and the surreal nature of the conversation, he struggled to judge the situation rationally, wondering if this was some convoluted political tactic or a bizarre bribe. She looked out toward the horizon, noting that it was getting late and she needed to return to the meeting. She added almost as a challenge that the legendary Archman would never have been as reckless or as bold as the boy standing before her. As they re-entered the meeting hall, every eye turned toward them with burning curiosity. Cleans admitted to himself that he had been too complacent, underestimating the political quagmire he had jumped into. He knew the nobles would never truly believe a mannerless boy had acted in self-defense against the Count's son. When the investigator pressed for details on their private discussion, the protagonist ignored the question and strode toward a sword leaning against the wall. He gripped the hilt and drove the blade into the floor with a violent thud, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Shocked by the sudden outburst, the assembly watched in silence as the boy turned to face Count Cornwell. He challenged the Count to prove his accusations right then and there, to settle the matter of his innocence once and for all. Cleans invoked the ancient northern tradition of trial by combat, a lawless duel, where the victor is declared innocent and the loser is proven guilty. The Count was stunned, wondering if the boy had finally lost his mind. Trial by combat was a brutal relic of the past with no restrictions, but the Count quickly saw a golden opportunity. If he could move the dispute from the courtroom to the arena, he could bury the evidence of his mercenaries along with the boy. He accepted the challenge with a predatory smile, announcing he would appoint a champion to fight in his stead and swearing to end the boy's life. Clen simply smiled back unbothered, declaring that he would be the one to finish the Count's line. With a duel set for 4 days' time, Clans knew this was only the beginning. He intended to use the Count as a stepping stone to show every bastard in the family exactly who he was, planning to tear the house down and rebuild it in his own image. In a private wing of the mansion, Kenz's older half-brother, Delan, erupted in fury. He screamed that the challenge was absolute madness, questioning if Kenz understood that he was gambling with his life. Kenz, exhausted by the lecturing, told him he was well aware and tired of hearing it. Don mentioned that their father had already granted permission for the duel, but he desperately offered to take Kenz's place as champion. Clenz refused instantly. Don argued that as the future ruler of the North, it was his duty to protect his younger brother. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Delan recalled the first time he saw Cleans as a baby. To him, the infant had looked like a beautiful angel, and he had spent 7 years waiting for his return from the monastery. With tears in his eyes, Delan grabbed Cleans and begged him to reconsider, desperate to prevent his brother's certain death. Their emotional confrontation was interrupted by a guard who arrived with urgent news. Count Cornwell had already chosen his champion. Clans pulled away from his brother's grip, his voice cold and focused as he asked who they would be facing. The guard revealed the name Randall, an excommunicated knight who had built a terrifying reputation on the battlefield. The scene shifted to a grimy tavern, where the doors swung open to reveal a massive, muscular man with a gaze of pure, unbridled savagery. Randall had been cast out of the knightly orders because of his uncontrollable, violent urge to slaughter everyone around him. He sat amidst a wreckage of broken furniture and fallen bodies, drinking a blood-red liquor directly from a wooden bucket with a monstrous expression of fury. He muttered that it had been a long time since he had heard a young boy scream, his anticipation for the slaughter palpable. Back at the manor, Clement listened to the description of his opponent, his eyes growing serious and filled with a grim, unwavering determination. Just then, a man approached Cleanse while carrying a sword wrapped carefully in cloth. Handing it over, he spoke in a serious tone. "Here is the sword you requested. I forged it exactly the way you asked, but please be careful with it. The moment it clashes against a mana-infused sword, it will shatter instantly." Cleanse quietly took the sword into his hands and inspected it, for a moment before replying without hesitation, "Good, then let's head out right away." At the same time, excitement had already spread throughout the entire arena. Every person gathered. There was talking about the same thing and the fact that Cleans had finally decided to appear in person. The atmosphere buzzed with curiosity and anticipation as countless eyes turned toward the battlefield. The scene then shifted toward the nobles seated high above the arena. One of them looked toward Cleans's father and said with visible surprise, "To think you'd actually come out in person." Then turning slightly toward him again, he continued with a faint smile, "But are you truly okay with this? My champion is a knight from the Empire. He might be quite a handful for your mannerless son. It's still not too late to send out Lord Delane instead, don't you think?" However, Kenz's father showed absolutely no reaction to those words. His expression remained calm and unmoved, as if he had already made up his mind long ago. Meanwhile, Cleans continued walking toward the arena, his eyes scanning the surroundings as thoughts ran through his head. Anyway, where is he? My opponent hasn't he come out yet? But the very next moment, an enormous shadow suddenly loomed over him. A massive man with the build of a monster stepped forward. His body looked like solid steel, muscles bulging beneath his clothes like a true warrior forged for battle. Slowly, he placed one heavy hand on top of Clint's head and looked down at him with an intimidating grin before speaking. "So you are Lord Cleans." The narration then revealed the identity of the terrifying man standing before him. He was none other than Conwell's champion, Randall. Randall looked down at Cleans with a cruel grin stretched across his face before speaking in a mocking voice. "You're much younger than I'd heard. Good, those arms of yours are so thin." His eyes narrowed dangerously as he leaned closer. "I wonder what kind of sound you'll make when your neck snaps." The instant Cleanse understood what was happening. He jumped backward at incredible speed, creating distance between them in a single movement. The sudden reaction shocked the audience, and murmurs immediately spread across the arena. What was that just now? Did he just run backward? Up in the stands, the same nobleman from earlier looked toward Clee again and spoke with amusement in his voice. "Did you see that, Your Grace? He's already acting like this before the duel has even begun. Can he really handle a fight against someone like Randall?" Meanwhile, Randall let out a low laugh before speaking once more. "Oh dear, he already looks completely terrified." But Cleans, while staring at him cautiously, who was thinking something entirely different in his mind. "It's not that." "Damn, that startled me. It reminded me of when that priest grabbed my shoulder last time. I backed away without even realizing it for a second. That bastard is useless right until the very end." At that same moment, from high above the arena, Captain Leah Wren was silently watching everything unfold below. Her sharp eyes remained fixed on Cleanse as the atmosphere grew heavier with tension. Just then, one of the guards approached her in a hurry and said anxiously, "Lady Hellion will be furious if she finds out about this. We should head back, Captain." However, Leah answered immediately without even looking at him. "I don't care. That woman isn't my mother anyway." Then, deep inside her thoughts, another idea crossed her mind. If he actually defeats that knight, I'll give him my lips. But even after thinking that, her gaze did not waver from the arena below. "There's also something I need to confirm," she quietly added. Meanwhile, down in the arena, Clem stood there feeling the weight of everyone's attention on him. Embarrassment crept across his face as he thought to himself, "This is so embarrassing." Then, trying to act calm and composed, he awkwardly spoke up while straightening himself. "Well, you see, I've been suffering from a stiff neck lately." Clean straightened himself and spoke with clear irritation in his voice. "So you'd better not touch my shoulder." Despite the warning, Randall slowly reached his hand forward once again, as if deliberately trying to provoke him. The moment Clem saw that, his expression twisted in annoyance and he immediately snapped back. "I told you not to touch me, you perverted bastard. Are your ears stuffed with muscles too?" Then again, that's exactly why the Empire abandoned you. For a brief moment, the entire arena fell silent. Then Randall's face slowly broke into a savage grin. "Excellent," he said in a low voice. "The fouler your mouth is, the more you'll have to scream with it later." The instant those words left his mouth, Randall grabbed forward and threw a devastating punch straight toward Cleanse. His massive fist cut through the air with monstrous force, powerful enough to crush a normal man instantly. However, at that exact moment, Cleans calmly unbuttoned his coat, and in the very next second, boom. Randall's fist smashed directly into the ground, causing a violent explosion-like impact that shattered the stone beneath him. Dust and debris erupted into the air as cracks spread across the arena floor, but Randall's eyes widened in surprise. The only thing left in his hand was Clee's coat. Cleans himself had already disappeared from that spot before the attack could land. The audience immediately burst into chaos. The ground shattered. Just what kind of power was that? Wait, look over there. Everyone quickly turned toward the opposite side of the arena, where Cleanse could now be seen standing at a distance with a short sword in his hand. His expression remained tense as he stared at Randall carefully. That bastard has a seriously nasty temper. Then, deep inside his mind, Cleans began analyzing the situation calmly. A direct clash is going to be difficult, just as I expected. If I take even one hit from that massive body, I'll be the one blown apart. I hate admitting it, but this isn't a situation where I can afford to take it easy. Meanwhile, the spectators continued whispering nervously among themselves as they watched the overwhelming difference in raw power between the two fighters. I think he dodged that pretty well, but how was he supposed to defeat a monster like that? Another man nearby swallowed hard before speaking in disbelief. Even a single graze from that attack would shatter his bones. Some of the spectators were still whispering among themselves. He's just walking to his death. Nearby, Cleans' friend called out his name, and at that moment, he remembered what Cleans had said earlier. "You're going to take my place in the trial by combat." That would only hand them a legal excuse to kill the Rainland heir. As those words echoed in his mind, he silently thought to himself, "You're right. The fate of the family is on the line, so I can't just do whatever I want." However, before that thought could even fully settle in his mind, the fight had already begun on the other side of the arena. Randall suddenly rushed forward at terrifying speed, closing the distance between them in an instant. Cleanse immediately drew his sword and launched an attack, but Randall casually stopped the blade with nothing but his bare hand. The sheer force behind it shocked everyone watching. In the very next moment, Randall struck back, forcing Cleans to slide backward across the ground. But Randall did not give him even a second to recover. Moving with overwhelming speed, he appeared right in front of Cleans again and continued attacking relentlessly. While mocking him, Randall sneered, "Do you think you can win just by dodging?" Cleans was using every ounce of strength he had just to block the incoming attacks. Each strike felt heavier than the last, pushing him further and further back. Meanwhile, Randall continued to ridicule him without mercy. "Why don't you try using your necromancy? Aren't you the great Archhammond?" The moment Randall looked directly into Cleans's eyes, he noticed something strange. Cleans was smiling, not a confident smile nor a cheerful one, the kind of smile that carried irritation and suppressed rage. Deep inside, Cleans quenched his thoughts in anger. "This is annoying. Should I just use necromancy and kill them all?" After witnessing that overwhelming pressure, even Randall instinctively stepped back in fear. Sweat began pouring down his face as his body reacted before his mind could fully understand what he had just felt. The confidence and arrogance he had shown until now were starting to crack among the audience. Confused voices immediately began to spread. What did Randall just dodge? No way. He must be going easy on him. But Randall himself knew that was not the truth. Inside his mind, he was struggling to understand what had just happened. What was that just now? There was definitely nothing there. But even though Cleans had not visibly done anything, Randall could feel an intense aura of death coming from within him. It was not something he could see with his eyes, yet his instincts were screaming at him to stay away. That invisible pressure alone was enough to make fear crawl through his entire body. Seeing Randall suddenly retreat like that, the man seated above the arena clicked his tongue in irritation and shouted, "What's going on? Why is Randall acting like that?" At that moment, Cleans calmly stepped forward and spoke clearly in front of everyone present. "Don't worry, I won't use anything like necromancy because I am a Reinland. This is a place to prove oneself entirely with a sword." He paused briefly before continuing in a firm voice. "Therefore, I won't use necromancy." The moment those words were spoken, shock spread throughout the entire arena. His father, his friend, and nearly everyone watching from the audience stared at him in disbelief. No one had expected him to say something like that. Until now, many people had looked at him with suspicion because of his necromancy. But hearing those words directly from Cleans began to change the atmosphere completely. The crowd's opinions slowly started shifting. Then little by little, people began cheering for him. "Yeah, this is what a trial by combat should be. We're with you. We'll support you. See, it wasn't just a bluff after all." The arena that had once been filled with doubt and mockery was now gradually being overtaken by excitement and support, all because of Clemen's unwavering declaration. Randall infused even more mana into his blade, the energy around the sword growing sharper and heavier as he prepared himself for another attack. Staring directly at Cleans, he muttered with confidence that Barat has no mana. It was then explained why the Imperial swordsmanship style was feared across the Empire. The true strength of Imperial swordsmanship lay in never holding back one's mana by pushing every sense to its absolute limit. Breathing, muscles, blood flow, and reflexes. A swordsman could unleash a single burst of explosive power capable of hunting down an opponent in an instant. Randall gathered all of his strength into one devastating strike and rushed forward at incredible speed. His entire focus was on ending the fight with a single attack, but at that exact moment, Cleans calmly dodged. As he watched Randall's movements, Cleans quietly said, "I can see it. His technique, mana capacity, even the arc of his blade." Every last bit of it to cleanse, Randall's attacks had started to look painfully obvious, like a damn fly. Hearing those words only fueled Randall's anger further. Once again, he gathered every ounce of his strength into another attack, this time even more powerful than before. The force behind it was nearly double the previous strike. The moment the attack landed, a massive explosion erupted across the arena. Dust and mist spread everywhere, swallowing the battlefield and blocking everyone's vision. The audience could barely see anything through the cloud created by the impact. Randall's eyes widened in disbelief. Did he actually read every trajectory of my sword in that short a time? Then suddenly, from behind him, Cleans appeared, moving through the smoke without a sound. Clean stepped directly into Randall's blind spot and prepared his counterattack. With a body that size, your back is completely exposed. The next instant, Clean struck. His timing was flawless. The precision and smoothness of his technique were so incredible that everyone watching was left completely stunned. Even the experienced warriors in the arena could hardly believe what they had just witnessed. Meanwhile, inside his mind, Randall was in total confusion. This makes no sense. This bastard. He doesn't have any mana. So how the hell? Not far away, one of the soldiers standing beside Leah Ren spoke in disbelief. Did you just see that, Captain? At that moment, Leah Ren herself was blushing slightly as she watched Clen's fight, clearly affected by the overwhelming skill and confidence he was displaying before everyone. After that, the scene shifted to another place where a heavy silence filled the room. In the middle of it, a voice could be heard speaking calmly, yet filled with frustration. Normally, I would have stepped in myself. Before anyone else could react, another man quickly answered. Your Grace, that's but his words were cut short by the protagonist's father. I know, he said in a low voice. I shouldn't act on personal feelings. If I step forward now, the prestige of the Rhineland family will only fall even further. His expression grew darker as he continued, but the opponent is a knight from the Empire. Cleanse has absolutely no chance of winning. The other man looked troubled after hearing that and asked carefully, then why did you permit the duel? For a moment the protagonist's father stayed silent, as if carrying years of regret inside his heart. Then he finally spoke. He stepped forward to defend the honor of his late mother. His voice was heavy with guilt. Even when he was falsely branded as Archiman and locked away in the monastery, I couldn't save him. His fists tightened slowly. So what right do I have to stop him now? The atmosphere became even heavier. In the end, he continued bitterly, I can't protect anything. Not my child, not my family. Hearing those painful words, the other man immediately tried to reassure him. You don't need to worry. Your Grace, young master doesn't fight losing battles. Right after that, the scene returned to the present battlefield. The duel was still ongoing, yet even Clean's his father could not hide the shock in his eyes after witnessing what was happening before him. At the same time, the narration began to explain the history and nature of the Rhineland family. The Rhineland family was known as the Northern Swordsmanship family. In order to survive the merciless frozen lands of the north, they developed a sword style that reduced mana consumption to the absolute minimum. Every movement was refined for efficiency, conserving strength and mana so they could endure long battles within the brutal icy fields. On the other hand, Imperial swordsmanship was completely different. Imperial swordsmanship was predation itself. Imperial swordsmanship was a style built entirely around domination, overwhelming the opponent by unleashing an enormous amount of mana all at once and crushing them before they could react. In contrast, Rhineland swordsmanship followed a completely different philosophy. It focused on patience, precision, and striking only at the perfect opening while using the smallest amount of mana possible. That was the true essence of the Rhineland family's techniques, the ultimate swordsmanship that achieved maximum efficiency with minimal mana. As the realization spread across the battlefield, Clen spoke calmly while facing Randall directly. This is how I, someone without mana, can still wield my family's techniques. His eyes remained steady despite the pressure pouring from his opponent. It might lack power, but it's more than enough to beat down a guy like you. The moment those words reached him, Randall's expression twisted with rage. Veins bulged across his face as he glared at Cleans furiously. You little rat. At the same time, an overwhelming amount of power suddenly began gathering throughout Randall's entire body. Mana surged violently around him, growing denser and heavier every second. It was clear that he was preparing to release every ounce of mana he possessed in a single devastating attack. From above, the man watching the duel noticed the change instantly. His eyes widened as he thought to himself, there it is. Randall's secret technique, a mana burst that instantly seals the opponent's movements. The pressure on the battlefield kept increasing non-stop. The air itself felt heavier as Randall's power continued to rise higher and higher. Then, with a furious roar, Randall shouted, Don't make me laugh, you bastard. I'm the one who will win. In the very next moment, he exploded forward at terrifying speed and closed the distance. Between himself and Cleans almost instantly, his attack came crashing down with monstrous force, powerful enough to crush his opponent in a single strike. But at the last possible second, Cleans reacted without panic. He moved his sword with perfect timing and blocked Randall's attack head-on. But there was one thing everyone still remembered about that sword. The warning that had been given earlier at the very beginning of the duel. The moment it clashes with a mana-infused sword, it will shatter. And exactly as predicted, the instant cleanse blocked Randall's Manhwa attack. Cracks spread across the blade before it completely broke apart. Pieces of the shattered sword scattered through the air. Seeing that, Randall immediately smirked victoriously. Serves you right. With this, your sword is, but before he could even finish his sentence, Clen suddenly smiled. Yeah, he said calmly, now it's finally complete. The weapon to hunt you. For a brief moment, Randall could not understand what he meant. Then it happened. Cleanse moved forward in an instant. Instead of treating the shattered weapon as useless, he used the broken blade itself like a short manblade designed for close-range combat. Before Randall could properly react, Clem stepped directly into his range and slashed at point-blank distance. A sharp strike flashed through the battlefield. Randall's arm was cut clean off. The severed arm flew through the air as blood scattered everywhere, and Randall's expression twisted into complete shock and agony. He let out a horrifying scream as he collapsed backward. At that moment, someone loudly declared, "The duel is over." Meanwhile, among the people watching the fight, one man stared at the battlefield in disbelief while thinking to himself, just as the young master said, Rhineland's swordsmanship can be performed with minimal mana. That should only be possible for a seasoned knight. Yet he flawlessly executed everything from the footwork to the path of the sword. And on top of that, he deliberately baited his opponent into breaking his sword so he could strike from point-blank range. The man could barely believe what he had witnessed. No matter how you look at it, this is the young master's perfect victory. On the battlefield, Randall continued screaming loudly in pain after losing his arm. Immediately, a group of healers rushed forward toward him in panic. "Hurry up and stop the bleeding. Quickly, hold his arm down. Cast sleep magic." The entire area became chaotic as the healers desperately tried to stabilize him. Meanwhile, Cleans calmly watched the scene before asking, "Can that be reattached?" However, despite his calm voice, he actually looked visibly disappointed. After hearing the severity of the injury, the healers quickly responded, "No, it only needs basic healing magic. We'll have to prepare a prosthetic arm." Hearing that answer, Clen simply replied, "Oh really? Is that all?" At the same time, deep inside his mind, he quietly thought to himself, even after 200 years, healing magic hasn't advanced much at all. Then, from the other side, his father called out to him with a serious expression, "You feel nothing after seeing a severed limb." The moment Clans heard those words, his expression slightly changed. "Right, I'm not Arjuman right now," he reminded himself internally. After that, Cleans quietly began walking away from the scene as if everything had already ended. While moving forward calmly, he thought to himself, "Should I pretend to be scared now?" At that very moment, the true mastermind behind the entire incident finally stepped forward. His face was filled with disbelief and anger as he shouted, "This makes no sense for Randall to lose. Do you even know how much money I spent to hire that knight?" Before he could continue raging any further, Clean's father suddenly spoke from behind in a cold and authoritative voice. "Count Conwell." The man immediately turned toward him. As agreed, Clean's father continued, "Admit your wrongdoing and fulfill the winner's demands." Count Conwell's face twisted with frustration and desperation. "I've lost my son and my exclusive knight. How can I?" Before he could even finish speaking, something horrifying happened. In an instant, it looked as though his head had been severed cleanly from his body. For a split second, everyone froze. Then the scene focused on Clement's cold, emotionless eyes as he stared directly at him. Zelkin Conwell. The next moment revealed the truth. Zelkin Conwell was still alive. His head had not actually been cut off. His entire body trembled violently as he frantically touched his neck again and again, unable to understand what had just happened. It had only been an illusion created by the terrifying pressure of Clement's power, yet to him it felt completely real. Inside his mind, panic exploded. What was that? My neck. Definitely. Sweat poured down his face as fear completely overtook him. Cleanse then stood directly before him and spoke in a chilling voice. "As the victor of this duel, I command you. Confess your sins before the Master of the North and kneel to beg forgiveness." His voice became even heavier, almost as if death itself was speaking through him. "Bow your head and beg for mercy, for you shall be crushed under the weight of your sins and repent." The moment those words entered Delin Conwell's ears, true terror consumed him. He could almost see death standing directly above his head. His entire body shook uncontrollably. Cold sweat dripped down endlessly, and even breathing became difficult. Unable to resist any longer, he finally broke down. "I was wrong," he stuttered fearfully. "My son and I dared to try and harm young Master Cleans at the same time." The narration revealed the truth behind the terrifying ability Cleans had used. This was originally a voice meant to call upon the souls of the dead man's voice. It was a soul-disturbing technique exclusive to necromancers, a horrifying power capable of inducing extreme terror in the living. Zelin Conwell completely broke down before Cleanse. Trembling uncontrollably, he fell to his knees and bowed his head deeply while begging for forgiveness. "Furthermore, I insulted young Master's mother, Grand Duchess Claire." He confessed desperately, "Please forgive me." The people watching the scene could hardly believe what they were witnessing. One of the spectators stared in complete shock and muttered, "Am I really seeing this right now? To think a pillar of the Branch family would crumble like that." Meanwhile, Clen slowly raised his shattered sword toward the sky. Even though the blade was broken, the pressure surrounding him only felt heavier than before. Then in front of everyone gathered there, he began speaking with absolute confidence. "Good, it begins from here." His voice echoed across the entire battlefield. Everyone standing here listened closely. A declaration of my existence. The atmosphere instantly became silent. "To set this family right, I am the challenger of this trial by combat and its rightful victor." His eyes remained completely steady as he continued. The son of Grand Duchess Claire Ladalasis and the second son of the North's strongest knight, Hankel Rinland. Then, proudly declaring his name before everyone present, he finished, I am Clen Rienland. After that powerful declaration, the scene shifted to a completely different location. The atmosphere there was far calmer and heavier, almost sacred. A man could be seen entering a quiet hall while nearby a priest was praying softly. We shall go where your light does not reach. Even if the path is perilous, even if it is painful, please watch over our intent, O God of light. Just then, the man who had entered stepped forward and spoke. Cardinal Morrow. The priest slowly turned toward him. Yes, Garrison, your voice sounds grim. What's the matter? Garrison's expression remained serious as he answered immediately. The surveillance target was attacked. The attackers were Necromancer and his undead. For a brief moment, silence filled the room. I need to verify this, Garrison added firmly. I need to verify this personally. However, Cardinal Morrow showed no sign of concern at all. Instead, he calmly replied, there's no need to worry about that. It was all part of the plan. He was dispatched in cooperation with the Empire. Garrison's eyes narrowed slightly. Cardinal Morrow continued speaking as if explaining something completely reasonable. A necromancer is an existence that naturally incites fear. Those terrified by their appearance will inevitably seek out God. Countless people will flock to our holy order. Then his voice became even colder. Understand this, Garrison. If we can revive the holy order and spread, gods will through just a handful of sacrifices. But before he could finish his sentence, Garrison suddenly moved. In an instant, he grabbed Cardinal Morrow by the throat with overwhelming force. His eyes were filled with fury as he spoke through gritted teeth. A servant of the Holy Temple has fallen for petty political games and made deals with heretics. The next moment, with nothing but raw strength, Garrison crushed the Cardinal's head completely. Blood exploded across the surroundings as though my body collapsed lifelessly onto the ground. Right after that, another voice suddenly echoed through the area. Do you feel any better? The man slowly stepped forward through the blood-covered hall and looked directly at Garrison before speaking in a calm yet mocking tone. You haven't changed, Garrison Vermin. To think you've killed more clergymen than the necromancers themselves have. A faint smile appeared on his face as he continued. The people of the Holy Order. You really ought to know what you're hiding inside that gut of yours. The narration then revealed the identity of the man standing there. He was the Archbishop of the Holy Order. Palamon Elpir glared at him coldly after hearing those words. Was this your doing, Palmenel? Palamon simply answered without hesitation. Of course not, I merely authorized it. Then his expression became more serious. And besides, he added, I brought a piece of information regarding your surveillance target. The moment those words were spoken, Garrison instantly moved to attack him as well. His fist shot forward with enough force to kill an ordinary man immediately, but Palamon's speed was far beyond normal. Before Garrison could even realize what happened, Palamon had already disappeared from directly in front of him and reappeared elsewhere, avoiding the strike effortlessly. Then Palamon calmly continued speaking as though nothing had happened. When necromancy is used, it inevitably leaves traces. He raised a strange cross-shaped object while explaining, this is the cross containing those traces. It belonged to the necromancer you killed. Garrison's expression hardened as he listened carefully. Palamon continued, one of the traces belongs to soul-returning arts, a type of necromancy that raises corpses on something the Empire is actively researching. Then his voice lowered slightly, but the other trace is different. It resembles the original form of necromancy, one that manipulates souls rather than corpses. Garrison immediately reacted to those words. The original form of necromancy. Yes, Palamon answered calmly. The atmosphere suddenly became much heavier. It means there were two necromancers present at the scene. Then Palamon stared directly into Garrison's eyes and spoke slowly, making sure every word carried its full weight. Listen carefully, Garrison, your surveillance target. The second son of the Rhineland family. A brief silence followed. Cleanse Rhineland is a necromancer. After that, we are shown a light drizzle falling from above. Deep inside a dark cave, a faint light could be seen glowing from within. Someone was mining there alone, the sound of metal striking stone echoing through the tunnel. A few moments later, the miner slowly stood up to catch his breath. But the instant he turned around, we suddenly saw a terrifying devilish hand emerging right behind him. Before the man could even fully understand what was happening, the creature instantly attacked him from behind. The scene then shifts toward Little Maid, who looked completely troubled as she stared at something in front of her. With an embarrassed expression, she said, "This is a disaster. I ended up making a doll of the young master's face. It looks exactly like him," despite her words. There was also a strange sense of pride in her voice as she smiled awkwardly. Right in front of her sat Cleans, calmly going through a pile of documents without paying much attention to her reaction. After that, we are told through Cleans's narration. A week has passed since the trial by combat, defeating Landel, who came out as the champion with the family's technique, then successfully extracting Count Conwell's confession with the dead man's voice technique, and publicly announcing my existence in front of the Branch family faction. I thought I was finally going to be acknowledged by everyone. However, his expression soon turned exhausted as he continued. But the real problem is that this 15-year-old body lacks the stamina to keep up. Cleanse then glanced toward Little Maid with an annoyed expression before saying, "If you're done playing, hurry to your room and sleep." Hearing that, Little Maid immediately puffed her cheeks and complained, "You're so mean, young master. You always play by yourself." Clint looked at her in disbelief before replying, "What do you mean play? Can't you see I'm reading right now?" Little Maid crossed her arms before speaking again. "It's just a novel anyway, so you're playing basically." Through Clean's narration, we're then told, well, the cover might look like an ordinary novel, but the inside is filled with my secret notes on anatomy, magic circuits, and spell formations. It's all about necromancy. As he quietly drank his tea, Clans continued thinking to himself, with my current body, I can summon 11 skeletons at most. My control is stable, but I lack the numbers for a war of attrition. I'll need to research this further. His expression slowly darkened as another thought crossed his mind. The biggest problem is that damn priest bastard. He looked ready to exterminate the very seed of any necromancer. He's already suspicious of me, so I have to somehow regain my original power before he comes looking for me. But how can I do that without getting caught by the others? Right after that, the scene shifts toward his father, who appeared to be discussing an urgent matter. He said, "We've received reports of sightings of this at the mine. They're commonly referred to as undead." The moment Cleans heard those words, his eyes sharpened. In his mind, he immediately thought, this is it. Without wasting even a second, he directly said to his father, "I will go." At the same time, another thought ran through his head. Real combat is the best form of research. Hearing his sudden decision, his father looked slightly concerned before asking, "I heard there have been reports of casualties. Will you be all right?" Clans calmly answered, "It won't be a problem." However, deep inside he was still thinking, after the trial by combat, even Henkel acknowledges me. Besides, if it's the undead, it must be related to the one that attacked me before. This is an opportunity. The scene then shifts toward the mission site itself, where a knight respectfully stood beside him before saying, "The Duke has ordered me to accompany you for your safety, young master." Hearing those words, Clen silently thought to himself, he should have known. Meanwhile, the knight standing in front of him looked completely relaxed despite the mission as he cheerfully said, "Anyway, the night sky looks amazing during a mission." A moment later, he offered Clans a freshly prepared dish and added, "Here, have this while it's still hot." Cleans immediately replied with a calm, "No thanks." However, the knight did not give up and awkwardly continued, "Young master, I should also do some work." Cleans glanced toward the completely burnt lump sitting near the fire before coldly responding, "Can't you see that lump of charcoal? You staying still is helping me." Through his narration, Kens then explained, "I learned one unexpected fact during this mission, and it's that Dunnell, the supposed knight commander, is completely useless when it comes to skills like cooking or hunting." Hearing that, Dunnell simply gave an embarrassed smile before lowering his head slightly and saying, "I have no face to show you. I don't know what to say." Clans let out a small sigh before replying, "Forget it. Just eat and I'll grill some more in a bit." At the same time, another thought crossed Clint's mind. I've spent over a decade running from the Allied Knight Orders, so this much is nothing. The atmosphere around the campfire slowly became calmer after that. The flames crackled softly while the dark night stretched endlessly above them. It was then that Dunnell suddenly spoke in a more serious tone. "When I watch you, young master, I feel that you are very different from others your age, hiding your talent with the sword and your spirit during the trial by combat." He paused for a moment before continuing carefully. "Because of that, I sometimes think that you might actually be the reincarnation of Archcommand." The instant those words were spoken, Clement's expression changed completely. He immediately looked toward Dunnell and coldly warned him, "Dunnell, never say that in front of that priest." Dunnell quickly raised his hands in panic before replying, "Of course I wouldn't." Archcommand was a demon who turned tens of millions of northerners into undead. The moment those words left his mouth, the campfire suddenly flared violently. The flames grew far larger and fiercer than before, crackling loudly as the heat spread through the area just moments ago. The surroundings had been calm and quiet under the dark evening sky, so the sudden change immediately shocked Dunkel. Seeing this, Clint slowly lifted his head. His face was filled with visible anger as he coldly said, "Never ever speak of that matter." Dunkel looked completely confused and alarmed by Clans' sudden reaction. "Young master," he called out carefully, but before either of them could say anything else, loud screams suddenly echoed from behind them. The two immediately turned around toward the source of the noise, only to see what looked like a horrifying corpse-like creature emerging from the darkness. Inside the village, complete chaos had broken out in every direction. Panic filled the streets as terrified people desperately ran for their lives. We could hear villagers screaming at the top of their lungs, "It's the undead. Everyone run." All around them, countless undead creatures were chasing after the villagers with horrifying speed, their twisted bodies moving unnaturally as they attacked anyone in sight. At that very moment, Dunnel suddenly arrived at the scene. The instant he entered the village, he immediately cut down several undead monsters with overwhelming force. His sword moved so quickly that the creatures barely had time to react before being torn apart. He continued charging forward without stopping, slaughtering monster after monster as he pushed deeper into the village. After advancing quite far ahead, Dunkel quickly turned around and shouted, "Young master." However, right behind him, Cleans was already advancing through the battlefield while eliminating every remaining monster in his path. Unlike the panicked villagers, his expression remained completely calm as he moved forward. While cutting down the undead one after another, he coldly said, "What are you doing, Dunnel? Go save the people." Hearing that order, Dunnel immediately straightened himself and responded loudly, "Yes, sir." Not long after that, the two of them worked together and completely overwhelmed the undead creatures. One after another, every monster in the village was destroyed, and the terrified villagers were finally rescued from the disaster. The atmosphere slowly calmed down as the surviving people gathered together. Still unable to believe they had escaped alive, one of the villagers then stepped forward with a grateful yet confused expression and said, "Thank you for helping us, but who are you?" After hearing the question, Dunnel proudly answered, "This is the second young master of the Rainland family." The moment the villagers heard the name of the Rainland family, their eyes widened in shock. The atmosphere immediately changed as they stared at, cleansed with disbelief and surprise. But Dunnel quickly shifted the conversation back toward the main issue and seriously asked, more importantly, since when did those things start appearing? Meanwhile, Cleans quietly observed the corpses of the undead lying across the village. After carefully examining them, he calmly said, "This is a form of reanimation magic used to revive and control corpses." His eyes slowly narrowed as a realization crossed his mind. As expected, it's the same technique as the one that attacked me in the forest before. Right after that, one of the villagers stepped forward and hurriedly answered. Since 2 months ago, it was right after the Count's family restricted access to the mine. People started going missing around that time too. His voice trembled with fear and anger as he continued. "Also, those undead are all residents of our village." The moment Cleans heard those words, his expression instantly changed. Shock appeared clearly on his face as he slowly turned back toward the villager and asked, "What did you just say?" Before anything else could happen, another man suddenly grabbed Cleans tightly by his clothes and shouted directly at him. "Are you a Rainland? Answer me," I asked, "if you're really a Rainland." Seeing the man grabbed Cleans so aggressively, Dunnel immediately stepped forward in anger and yelled, "Hold on, what do you think you're doing to the young master?" Dunnel forcefully pulled the villager backward, trying to separate him from Cleans. However, even then, the man continued screaming in desperation. "Let go of me. We begged for help for 2 whole months and we got no word back. And now just the two of you show up only to ask, since when has this been happening?" His voice gradually broke apart as tears and rage mixed together. Then he pointed toward one of the corpses lying nearby and shouted, "On top of that, the person you just cut down, that's my father." He was talking about the same miner we had seen at the very beginning of the chapter. The villager continued yelling in pain. "All he did was work day and night at the mine. Why do we have to suffer like this?" Meanwhile, Clen stood there silently while countless thoughts ran through his mind. The name Archimond echoed within his head again and again as his expression slowly darkened. It was clear that anger was beginning to rise inside him. Finally, with cold eyes and an irritated voice, Clen said, "You're too loud. Shut up. Why is any of that my fault?" Clans coldly continued. "I wasn't the one who turned your father and the others into undead, was I? If you want to vent your anger, you should pick the right target." The moment he said those words, flames slowly began emerging from his hand, their glow illuminating the dark surroundings. Seeing this, Dunnel immediately stepped forward and hurriedly said, "Young master, I'll handle things here." But before Dunnel could finish speaking, Clans calmly began chanting in a solemn voice. "I command the innocent spirits who died in sorrow." The atmosphere instantly became heavy. Dunnel stared at him in complete shock as Clans continued the incantation. "I shall light this lantern to illuminate your path." His voice echoed through the silent village while the flames around him flickered unnaturally. "I, Klein Reinland, shall uphold your will." Then raising his glowing hand slightly forward, he declared, "So follow my guidance." At that very moment, an unbelievable sight unfolded before everyone's eyes. Blue-colored souls slowly began emerging from inside, the undead bodies lying across the village, one after another. The trapped spirits that had been imprisoned within those corpses finally started breaking free. The glowing souls quietly floated into the air while looking down toward their own lifeless bodies below. Cleanse was performing all of this using his own ability. The liberated spirits began speaking softly among themselves, but the language they used was something only Clans could understand. After listening carefully for a moment, Clans quietly replied, "I understand." The villagers watching this scene were left completely speechless. Shock and disbelief covered every face present there. Then suddenly, one of the people spoke in astonishment. a technique said to have been used 200 years ago during the plague in the north to liberate the dead. Meanwhile, the same villager who had been blaming Cleans earlier slowly looked toward his father's spirit. The old man turned back toward his son with a gentle smile on his face before his soul gradually drifted away alongside the others. Right after that, we are shown one of the spirits pointing toward the mountains while saying, "The mine is that way." If you go straight up that mountain path later, while following behind Cleans, Dunkel finally broke the silence and asked, "What did you talk about with the spirits earlier?" Clans calmly replied, "Nothing much, it was just the spirits thanking me for helping them pass on." For a brief moment, his expression darkened before he added and pleading with me to get revenge. Dunkel quietly repeated the word revenge. At that instant, memories from earlier flashed through his mind. He remembered asking Cleans, "You might actually be the reincarnation of Archcommand," and Ken's replying with visible anger, "Never ever speak of that matter." The suspicion inside Dunkel's heart only grew stronger. Suddenly, he unsheathed his sword and directly placed the blade against Clen's neck before coldly asking, "So let me ask you this, who exactly are you?" After that, the story shifted into the past. Inside the grand estate, voices filled the halls as people whispered among themselves in fear and disbelief. "Is this boy Lord Clen Rhineland? The young master who had been locked away in the monastery for 7 years has finally returned to the estate. The cursed young master who calls himself Archimand, but what disturbed everyone the most was not his return. It was his eyes. His pitch-black gaze looked so empty, so close to complete nothingness that it was hard to believe those eyes belonged to a young child. Anyone who looked at him felt an unexplainable chill creeping down their spine, and perhaps everything truly began from that very day. The first dead cat was discovered inside the estate's kitchen. The second one was later found in the backyard garden. Then another appeared the following day, one after another. The bodies kept appearing until a total of 7 dead. Cats had been found throughout the estate. Fear quickly spread among the servants and nobles. I heard he used necromancy the moment he was born. They say his mother's bloodline was involved with dark magic. Didn't he say his name was Archhammond? See, the rumors were true all along. It's a cursed bloodline. Before long, everyone in the estate had begun suspecting a single person. Yet despite the growing tension and terrifying rumors surrounding him, the young master himself showed no reaction at all. Ever since returning to the estate, Cleans had done nothing but quietly stare out the window in silence, as if the whispers of the people around him held absolutely no meaning to him. One of the knights spoke in a low voice, just as everyone says, "The young master is suspected of being Archimand, but he's still too young. He probably has nothing to do with these incidents." That night, while the entire estate slept under the darkness of midnight, Dunkel suddenly noticed someone walking alone through the halls. "Young master, where is he going at this hour?" Cleans did not stop or look back. Without saying a word, he continued walking deeper into the darkness. Feeling uneasy, Dunkel quietly followed behind him while keeping his distance. After some time, Cleans finally arrived at a place that made Dunkel freeze in surprise. The cemetery. Why did he come here? The moonlight barely reached through the rows of old tombstones, making it difficult to see clearly. I can't see him properly because of these gravestones. Should I get closer and check? Carefully stepping forward, Dunkel moved between the tombstones until he finally got a clear look at the young master. And the moment he saw the scene in front of him, his eyes widened in shock. What in the world is this? There, surrounded by the dead cats, stood young master Clans. He seemed to be quietly preparing something. Beside their small, lifeless bodies, hearing Dunkel's voice, Ken slowly turned around and looked back at him with those same dark, emotionless eyes. Then in a calm and quiet voice, he replied, "I'm going to perform funeral rites for them. Now." Dunkel stared at the scene in confusion before speaking again. "Pardon, funeral rites." Cleans quietly looked down at the dead cats lying before him and calmly explained. "Looking at the lesions, this is an infectious disease. It's harmless to humans, but fatal to animals. If these bodies are left alone, the disease will continue to spread. Other beasts might dig them up as well." Hearing that, Dunkel's expression slightly changed. For a moment, he simply watched the young master kneeling there in the cold cemetery at the dead of night, personally handling the infected corpses with his own hands. "It will ruin your hands," Dunkel said with concern. "We should call someone else to handle this." But Clen slowly shook his head. "Someone has to do it anyway." His voice remained calm and emotionless, yet strangely sincere. "A job that someone must do." And with those words, the story from the past slowly came to an end. The scene then returned to the present. The atmosphere had become incredibly tense. Dunkel stood facing Cleanse with his sword pressed directly against his neck. His sharp eyes were filled with suspicion, hesitation, and confusion as he demanded an answer. "Tell me, on who exactly are you?" After hearing those words, young master remained completely calm. Rather than answering immediately, he quietly looked at Dunkel and spoke in a composed voice. "Let me ask you something first. Do you remember the very first saying of Berkel Rhineland?" Dunkel answered without hesitation, as if those words had long been engraved into his heart. "It is one's actions, not their roots, that define a being." Cleans gave a faint nod. Yes, that's right. Then he slowly continued speaking. The reason you, a poor peasant, were able to rise and become the captain of the knights, and the reason I, the son of a foreign mother, am still alive today is because of those very words. The silence between them grew heavier. Since leaving the monastery, the person who has spent the most time by my side has been you, Dunnel. Clans looked directly into his eyes as he continued. So you decide, if you truly believe that I am Archimonde, then strike me down. The moment those words left his mouth, the tension in the air became suffocatingly heavy. Dunnel's sword remained still for several seconds before at last he slowly lowered it. However, even then the doubt in his eyes had not completely disappeared. I haven't decided yet, Dunnel said firmly, and I am certainly not convinced. He tightened his grip on the sword before continuing in a cold voice. However, the one I serve as the second young master of Rhineland, clean, not some atrocious devil feared across the continent. After hearing Dunnel's words, Clans quietly turned his head and looked deeper into the darkness ahead of them before calmly saying, "We need to move forward." The two of them then continued deeper inside the underground passage. As they walked further in, the atmosphere gradually became colder and heavier, almost as if death itself filled the air around them. Inside his mind, Clen silently thought, "I see, thanks for the compliment." The deeper they went, the darker the surroundings became. Realizing they could barely see anything ahead, Dunnel lit a torch. The orange flames flickered against the stone walls, finally revealing the horrifying sight hidden within the darkness. It smells like corpses. Scattered all around them were countless dead bodies. To be more precise, many of them had already decayed into skeletons. Bones were piled across the ground in every direction, creating an eerie and disturbing scene. But then Dunnel suddenly noticed movement ahead. Some of the corpses in front of them were slowly beginning to move. The moment he realized that, his expression hardened. "I can see 7 of them. There must be more deeper inside." At that moment, Clint calmly stepped forward and began chanting in a cold, composed voice, "I call upon you. Answer me." Then his voice echoed through the dark chamber once more. "I grant you flesh to crush your enemies." The instant those words were spoken, the skeletons lying across the ground suddenly began to react. One after another, the undead bodies rose from the floor and rushed forward toward the enemies ahead. Dunnel's eyes widened in complete shock as the battle instantly erupted. The undead creatures violently clashed against each other inside the narrow underground chamber. Bones shattered, weapons collided, and horrifying growls echoed through the darkness as the corpses tore into one another. Watching the scene unfold before his eyes, Dunnel could barely believe what he was seeing. This makes no sense. Skeletons that look like that actually exist. Cleans glanced at him after hearing that and calmly replied. Dalton's mercenaries said the same thing. Then with the slightest hint of amusement in his voice, he added, "Is it really that fascinating?" Not long after, the battle finally came to an end. The remaining undead collapsed onto the ground one after another, their bodies crumbling apart as silence slowly returned to the chamber. Dunnel immediately stepped forward while raising the torch higher to illuminate the path ahead. "Young master, this way." As the horrifying sounds echoed deeper from within the underground ruins, Dunnel immediately tightened his grip on his sword and carefully listened to the movements ahead. Judging by the sound, there are around 40 of them. His expression darkened as he quickly realized the situation they were facing. We're outnumbered. However, unlike Dunnel, Cleans remained completely calm without even the slightest trace of panic. He slowly raised his hand and began chanting once again in a cold, commanding voice, "I release the bindings that shroud your bodies." The air around them suddenly grew heavy as dark energy spread across the battlefield. "Free your souls bound in agony and obey my command." At that moment, the exact same scene that had once been shown before unfolded again. The defeated undead bodies scattered across the ground suddenly began moving once more under Clint's control. Dunnel watched the scene with widened eyes. "Young master, is this?" Clans calmly answered while keeping his eyes fixed ahead, converting subdued undead into allies. Then he continued as though explaining something completely ordinary. "It's a basic tactic when necromancers fight each other." After saying that, Clans glanced at the growing number of undead, now standing under his command, and quietly muttered, "Well, this should be enough to put up a fight." Then, without hesitation, he gave his orders. Vanguard charged forward. The skeleton soldiers immediately rushed ahead like disciplined warriors responding to a commander's call. The uncles were running too. The two of them immediately moved forward behind the advancing undead army. As they pushed deeper into the ruins, even more undead creatures appeared from the darkness ahead. Grotesque corpses and skeletons flooded the narrow passageways from every direction. But even then, Clemen's army continued advancing without stopping. The undead under his command clashed directly against the enemies, tearing through the hostile forces with frightening coordination. Bones shattered, rusted weapons collided, and horrifying cries echoed endlessly through the underground corridors. Watching everything unfold before him, Dunnel could hardly believe his own eyes. "Rear guards, support the attack." Cleans continued giving commands with absolute precision. "Keep breaking through." And every single skeleton obeyed perfectly, moving exactly like trained soldiers on an actual battlefield. As Dunal fought alongside them, he could not stop the thoughts running through his mind. It's hard to believe this even while watching it happen. He cut down another undead before continuing his thoughts. Skeletons are considered low tier even among the undead, yet the scene in front of him completely shattered that common belief. But they can move like this, just like a real army. The more he watched, the more impossible it all felt. The skeletons weren't fighting like mindless monsters. They moved with coordination, strategy, and discipline, almost as if they were veteran soldiers following a perfect commander. Before long, the battle finally came to an end. The countless undead enemies lying before them had been completely annihilated. As silence slowly returned to the underground ruins, Dunal stared at the overwhelming destruction around them in disbelief. We annihilated a force more than 4 times our size. Even now, he still struggled to fully understand what he had just witnessed. What in the world is this? But Clans simply looked deeper into the darkness ahead before calmly speaking once more. From here on out, it's just the two of us. Cleans calmly continued speaking as the two of them moved deeper into the underground ruins. You said you would believe in me. Then he looked straight ahead into the darkness and added in a quiet but firm voice, then believe in me until the very end. Dunal silently followed beside him before eventually speaking again. While observing their surroundings, it seems we've come quite deep already. How much farther do we need to go? But before Clans could answer, something suddenly fell from above. A drop of blood landed directly onto Dunal's face. His expression instantly hardened. Slowly raising his torch toward the ceiling ahead, he cautiously stepped forward. There's someone here. However, the moment the light illuminated the area before them, Dunal froze in horror. Dozens of dead bodies were hanging from ropes above them. The corpses swayed slightly in the darkness, their lifeless bodies dripping blood onto the cold stone floor below. The horrifying smell of decay filled the air so heavily that it became difficult to breathe. Dunal stared at the gruesome scene in disbelief. What in the world is all this? Cleans quietly looked at the hanging corpses before calmly explaining the truth. It looks like these are the villagers who were reported missing. His voice remained cold and steady. They were kidnapped and used as materials for reanimation magic. At that exact moment, another voice suddenly echoed through the chamber as expected. You understand it very well. Both Cleans and Dunal immediately turned toward the source of the voice. From the darkness ahead, a witch slowly revealed herself. A sinister smile appeared on her face as she began speaking. Reanimation magic is a spell that revives corpses and turns them into one's familiars. She slowly spread her arms while looking proudly at the horrifying scene around her. That's why it requires a massive quantity of high-quality bodies. Then she looked directly at Cleans and smiled even wider. It's basic knowledge among us necromancers, isn't it? Atmosphere instantly became much heavier. I never imagined I would meet you in a place like this. Her eyes narrowed as she addressed him with a title that should never have been spoken aloud. It's been a long time, Devil of the Continent. Then with complete certainty, she called him by another name, Lord Archamond. The moment those words reached his ears, Clen's expression completely changed. For the first time, genuine shock appeared on his face, and just then, the story once again shifted into the past. The scene changed back to the Rhineland estate. Dunal was standing beside Clans as he spoke respectfully. Shall we head straight to His Grace the Duke? After hearing that, Clans calmly replied, let me change my clothes first. Dunal quietly nodded, but at that moment, Clen suddenly felt a strange presence nearby. The clan's failure was once the continent's strongest. Inside his mind, he thought, I thought someone was there, and indeed, someone had been watching him. At that very moment, Lyre Wren was secretly present nearby, silently observing everything from the shadows. Then, as the scene continued, we were finally told one important truth: Necromancer. The story then began explaining the true origin of necromancers derived from the words corpse necros and divination. The term originally referred to those who summoned souls in order to receive prophecies and oracles from the dead. In ancient times, necromancers were feared, but they were not yet seen as absolute monsters. However, everything changed after that day. The world was thrown into terror during the great catastrophe known across the continent as the Archamond Incident. It was a disaster unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed before. Tens of millions of undead suddenly invaded the entire continent. The army was beyond human understanding. They neither ate nor rested. They did not fear pain, exhaustion, or even death itself. Conventional warfare became completely meaningless against them. Cities fell one after another. Kingdoms collapsed beneath the endless tide of undead. No matter how many enemies were slain, more would continue rising endlessly from the battlefield. The continent itself was pushed to the brink of destruction as the terrifying undead army devoured everything in its path. And standing above that horrifying force was a single being, Archamond, the master who commanded the dead. The war only came to an end when the legendary hero Berkel Rinland finally succeeded in striking down Archamond himself. After the catastrophe ended, countless people became fascinated by the terrifying power necromancy possessed. One after another, they attempted to research and recreate those forbidden arts. However, in the end, the only thing modern necromancers managed to reproduce was reanimation magic. Because of that, today's necromancers had been reduced to nothing more than second-rate magicians who merely raised corpses to use as disposable soldiers, just like the necromancer currently standing before Cleans. The scene then returned to the present. The red-haired woman slowly stepped forward with a mysterious smile on her face before elegantly introducing herself. "It has been a while, Lord Archhammond." Her crimson eyes quietly stared at Cleans. "I'm Pale, a necromancer." The moment those words were spoken, Dunnell's expression changed completely. The shock on his face was impossible to hide, Archhammond. But before he could even fully process those words, another terrifying detail immediately caught his attention. More importantly, that is even Cleans himself narrowed, his eyes slightly as he sensed the overwhelming power surrounding her. "You're right," he quietly admitted. His gaze moved toward the robe she was wearing. "It's an incredible amount of mana." Then, after observing her more carefully, he continued, "She infused magic directly into her robe. As far as I know, they are the only ones capable of imbuing mana into soft materials." Realizing the danger standing before them, Dunnell immediately stepped forward and pointed his sword directly toward Pale. "You there?" His voice echoed sharply through the underground chamber. "This is young Master Clean." His expression hardened with anger. "Don't you dare call him by the name of scum like Archhammond." For a brief moment, silence filled the room. Then, after noticing Clemen's reaction, the red-haired woman suddenly smiled mischievously and lightly laughed. "I was only joking." Her tone sounded playful, yet something about her presence still felt deeply unsettling. I suppose it was rude toward the young master of Rainland, but then her smile slowly faded as she continued speaking in a much calmer voice. "Still, I do know." Her eyes focused directly on Cleans, "the rumors surrounding you." Then she slightly narrowed her eyes in the unfamiliar magic I sensed just now. "You are definitely a necromancer just like me." The red-haired woman continued speaking while staring directly at Cleans with great interest. "But how should I put it? For a necromancer to use a sword." Her smile slowly widened as though she found the very idea amusing. However, before she could continue any further, Dunnell suddenly stepped forward and interrupted her with an angry voice. "Stop spouting nonsense and answer the question." His sword remained pointed directly toward her. "What did you do to those people?" His expression became even colder as he shouted once more. "And who put you up to this?" But the red-haired necromancer completely ignored his questions. Instead, she slowly raised her hand while calmly continuing her own explanation. "A true necromancer does not rely on tools." Dark mana began spreading from her body in every direction. "We command souls." The air inside the underground chamber instantly became heavier and controlled death. The moment she released her energy, all the corpses hanging around the room suddenly began reacting violently. The dead bodies twitched unnaturally while dark magic spread through them like a curse. Bones cracked, flesh twisted. The entire chamber started trembling beneath the overwhelming amount of mana. Dunnell immediately stepped back in alarm as the horrifying scene unfolded before them. The woman slowly spread her arms as if proudly presenting her greatest creation. "So let me show you." A terrifying smile appeared across her face. The true meaning of necromancy. Then, in a voice filled with obsession and madness, she declared the masterpiece I dedicated my entire life to. At that exact moment, something massive began emerging from the darkness ahead. First, an enormous hand appeared. Then gigantic legs slowly stepped forward, causing the entire underground chamber to shake violently with every movement. The creature was so huge that even the ceiling itself seemed too small to contain it. Dunnell stared at the monster in complete disbelief. "This is insane." His voice trembled slightly. "I have never seen anything like this even on the battlefield." The gigantic creature slowly revealed its full form from the darkness. A massive one-eyed monster. Dunnell's eyes widened as realization finally struck him. That's definitely a cyclops. Meanwhile, the red-haired necromancer gently approached the gigantic monster as if comforting a beloved pet. Her voice suddenly became strangely soft and affectionate. "Come here, baby." The enormous cyclops lowered itself slightly toward her. "I'm so sorry." She gently placed her hand against its massive body. "It must have been difficult holding yourself back this whole time, right?" Then she slowly pointed toward Cleans and Dunnell standing ahead. Her smile twisted into something terrifying. "I have a favor to ask you." The Cyclops let out a deep, monstrous growl that echoed throughout the underground ruins, and then with cold excitement in her voice, she gave the order, "Crush those two into a pulp." The enormous monster immediately began charging toward Cleans and Dunnell with terrifying speed, its massive footsteps shaking the entire underground chamber as if an earthquake were tearing through the ruins. The moment Dunnell saw the Cyclops move, his eyes widened in shock. "It's incredibly fast." The gigantic creature closed the distance between them almost instantly. And as soon as Dunkle realized that the young master's life was in immediate danger, he shouted at the top of his lungs. "It's dangerous, young master." But in that exact moment, Clen suddenly pushed Dunnell away with all his strength. Dunel's body was thrown backward across the ground, just as the Cyclops' devastating attack came crashing down directly onto Clans instead. The impact violently shook the underground ruins. Clans was sent flying far into the distance, before crashing heavily against the stone floor. Dust and debris scattered everywhere, and his condition instantly became terrible from taking the attack head-on. Meanwhile, the gigantic Cyclops slowly stood before him once again. The monster raised its enormous arm, preparing to crush Cleans completely before he could even recover. But before the attack could land, Dunel suddenly appeared between them. With a furious roar, he swung his sword with all his strength directly toward the Cyclops. Stay away from the young master. The powerful slash struck the monster head-on, creating a loud impact that echoed throughout the chamber. Seeing this, even Cleans looked momentarily surprised. At the same time, the red-haired witch calmly watched the battle from a distance with amusement in her eyes. That was a splendid strike. Mr. Knight, her smile slowly widened. But with that level of talent, you can't even leave a scratch on my masterpiece. The expression immediately stiffened after hearing her words, because at that very moment he saw it happen with his own eyes. The Cyclops' injured leg was regenerating. Its flesh twisted unnaturally before restoring itself completely as though the damage had never existed in the first place. Dunel stared at it in disbelief. Its leg is growing back. For a brief second, fear crossed his mind, but then his eyes slowly shifted toward Cleanse, lying injured behind him. Doesn't matter. His grip on the sword tightened. The young master threw himself into danger to save me. The thought alone shook Uncle deeply with a body that doesn't even possess a trace of mana. He lowered his head slightly in shame. I can't believe I actually dared to suspect someone like him of being Archhammond. The guilt inside his heart became heavier than ever before. Meanwhile, the gigantic Cyclops once again charged toward them with monstrous force. Dunel immediately rushed forward to stop it. He unleashed countless rapid strikes across the monster's massive body, his sword moving faster and faster as sparks flew with every impact. Slash after slash crashed against the Cyclops relentlessly, yet no matter how many times he attacked, it felt completely meaningless. Still, Dunel refused to stop. There is only one way to repay this shame. His breathing grew heavier as he continued fighting desperately. I will put my life on the line. Another powerful strike landed and protected the young master. After unleashing countless attacks, a small wound finally appeared on the monster's body. But before Dunel could even feel relieved, the flesh immediately began regenerating once again right before his eyes. The wound disappeared completely within moments. Dunel's eyes widened in frustration and disbelief. Damn it. His expression darkened as he watched the monster regenerate once more. The battle continued, growing more and more intense. Even after realizing the Cyclops possessed terrifying regenerative abilities, Dunel still refused to give up. He rushed forward once again and unleashed several more powerful strikes against the gigantic monster. His sword repeatedly crashed against its massive body with tremendous force. But no matter how many attacks he landed, none of them had any real effect. The Cyclops simply kept moving forward as though it were completely unstoppable. Then in the very next moment, the monster swung one of its enormous arms toward Dunel. Boom! The devastating attack struck him directly. Dunel's body was violently thrown across the underground chamber, smashing heavily against the stone walls before collapsing onto the ground. His condition instantly became terrible from the impact. Watching this scene unfold, the red-haired necromancer slowly smiled. It truly is beyond my imagination. Her eyes were filled with obsession and pride as she looked toward the gigantic creature she had created. Pale is deeply moved. The story then revealed the truth behind her madness. Her endless obsession with necromancy had consumed her entire life. After conducting countless experiments and pursuing forbidden knowledge far beyond ordinary understanding, her research had eventually surpassed the limits of conventional necromancy itself. And finally, she succeeded in creating a completely unique variant that nobody else could ever replicate. Because of that, she believed something with absolute certainty. This is innate talent. Her voice trembled with excitement. Not even the Archhammond himself could create something like this. Her smile twisted with overwhelming pride and arrogance. I have surpassed Archhamond's knowledge. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, the Cyclops slowly lifted Dunel's broken body into the air with one massive hand, preparing to crush him completely. But at that exact moment, a calm voice suddenly echoed through the chamber. Core connection point. Glenn slowly walked forward while speaking calmly, as though he were explaining something simple. That's the first key to synthesizing a Cyclops. The monster continued holding Dunel in the air while Cleans kept walking toward it without fear. The second is the core suture. His eyes remained completely focused on the Cyclops. That's why its limbs regenerate even after being cut off. Then he quietly added, it's also the source of its regenerative power. The atmosphere suddenly changed. Even Pale's expression slowly stiffened as she listened to him. So how do you kill that thing? Cleans calmly continued explaining the answer himself. Attacking its body directly like Dunel did is pointless. He slowly raised his weapon. All it takes is destroying a single core and it's over. Pale's eyes widened slightly. Then where exactly is that core? Clans answered immediately. A Cyclops core never stays in one place. His gaze sharpened. Because that single point is directly connected to its death. It constantly moves throughout the body. He took another step forward just like blood flowing through veins. The moment those words were spoken, Pale's confident expression finally began cracking apart. That's impossible. She shouted, finding it is impossible because it never stops moving. Then she desperately pointed toward her masterpiece once more. And didn't you hear what I said earlier? Her voice became louder and more unstable. This is the masterpiece I devoted my entire life to creating. She stretched out her hand and gave another order filled with killing intent. In the face of true talent, you are nothing. Then she screamed at the Cyclops, crush him. At that very moment, Cleans quietly closed his eyes for a brief second. Memories from his previous life flashed through his mind. Memories of slaughtering thousands upon thousands of Cyclopes across countless battlefields. The sensation remained so vivid that it felt as though it had happened only yesterday. He simply needed to trust those instincts once again. Then, in a single instant, Cleanse moved. A sharp flash cut through the darkness. Before anyone could even react, his attack pierced directly through the Cyclops' moving core with absolute precision. Crack, the core shattered completely. The gigantic monster suddenly froze in place. Then its massive body began collapsing piece by piece before crashing lifelessly onto the ground. Silence filled the underground chamber. Pale stared at the destroyed Cyclops in complete disbelief. What exactly are you? Her voice trembled as fear finally appeared on her face for the very first time. Cleans calmly looked at her and answered coldly, if this is what you devoted your entire life to creating. His eyes remained emotionless. Then perhaps you should make it a hobby in your next life. Death is often compared to sleep, like a weary body finally freed from the burden of everyday life. Maybe a body drenched in the weight of living is also released after death from the chains of its karma. That's what they say. Then we see Pale. Her eyes are closed, and then suddenly she opens them in surprise. Her hands stir in the water pooled on the ground. Looking up, she's stunned to see coffins floating all around her in the air. She stands and asks, what is this place? Before she gets an answer, a voice cuts through the quiet. You're awake. It tells her this place is beyond the outside world, a place where souls arrive. It's the afterlife. Pale is completely shocked and terrified. She can't believe it's real. Behind her stands Archimonde the Necromancer, eyes dead. The afterlife, Pale stammers. It all sounds like nonsense to her. Let me out of here. Klein, in his former form, stands among the floating coffins, weapon in hand. Pale's talking about leaving, he says. That means she still doesn't understand the situation. Shall we begin? The judgment of your sins. Pale's expression changes instantly. Sweat breaks out on her face. In the name of Archimonde, Klein says. Hearing those words, thousands of questions flood Pale's mind. The judgment of my sins? No, did he just say Archimonde? She panics. She knows that name. It's recorded in the Necromancer's books. History calls it a disaster, the name of a monarch who built an unprecedented army of the dead, the devil of the continent, the beginning and end of all necromancy, the one who commanded tens of millions of undead, the king of all necromancers. The whole world fears that name. Klein's voice drops low. Come closer. Hearing it, the witch trembles. Fear grips her and a strange, unnatural feeling runs through her body. Necromancer Pale, Klein continues. Pale is stunned. Before she can react, she notices her body moving on its own, walking toward Klein against her will. You turned innocent people into test subjects, Klein says. You kidnapped them, tortured them as tools, and bound them so they couldn't die, all to satisfy your own desires. Every word hits Pale like a blade. She clutches her face, shaking with fear and confusion. No, that can't be. Archimonde is dead, isn't he? That was 200 years ago. Black liquid drips onto her hand from above. She looks up and sees a coffin floating over her. You even use the dead as your tools, Klein says. So now you'll be my tool. One of the floating coffins drifts in front of Pale and opens. Pale is lifted off the ground. What do you mean I'll be your tool? She says, but the force pulls her harder, dragging her into the coffin. Terrified, Pale clings to the edge. The lid slams shut the moment she's inside. Klein stands in front of it, weapon in hand. Pale pounds and yells from inside, trying to get out. Klein asks, are you afraid of dying? He raises his weapon. If you are, don't worry. He strikes the coffin hard. We will meet again soon, he says to Pale. Pale is overwhelmed with fear. She's crying, tears streaming down her face, screaming in terror. But when she opens her eyes, she sees the mine. The fight is still going on. Realization hits her. I didn't die right. It feels like it was all a dream. She's still alive. Then we see Dunkel. He wakes up, takes in the scene in the mine, and is completely stunned. Unbelievable, he mutters. Pale's head is still alive. Klein watches silently, observing everything. Dunkel's mind races with confusion. He'd only lost consciousness for a moment, and when he opened his eyes, all this had happened. Did young master do all this alone? Pale asks, what's going on here? Why am I like this? Klein sits beside her and tells Dunkel, let's begin, Dunkel. Yes, sir, Dunkel replies. Pale shouts, why am I like this? What's going on here? Klein's voice turns deep. So you're finally coming to your senses, huh? You should understand the situation by now, Pale. Hearing his voice, something about it feels familiar. Behind Klein, Pale sees the shadow of Archimond. I told you we'd meet again, Archimond says. Pale's eyes go wide. She can't believe it. The rumors about Klein Reinlot were true. You're Archimond, she blurts out. Klein puts a finger to her lips, silencing her. Quiet, he says coldly. His aura and the atmosphere around him shift, like Archimond himself is speaking. I need information. Who sent you to the north? How many of you are there? Where were you sent, when, and why? Tell me everything, and I'll give you a painless death. Refuse, and I'll give you eternal life. Pale looks surprised. Eternal life like this? Yes, Klein replies. You'll stay beheaded forever. Let's see how long you last like that. He smiles cruelly. We see Dunkel writing everything down in his book. Master, I've written down everything you dictated, he says. Sitting on a stone, Klein nods. If we're done here, it's time to leave. Pale stops him, panicking. What about me? What about me? I did everything you said. Both Klein and Dunkel turn back to her. With a creepy smile, Klein says, oh right, I promised to kill you, did I? Tears of relief fall from Pale's eyes. Thank God. Finally, I can die. Don't worry, Klein says, gathering energy. I never break a promise. He casts his magic on Pale. You just have to wait about a week. Pale notices something behind her, dozens of cockroaches scurrying toward her fast. They'll take care of killing you, Klein says. Pale looks up as the cockroaches swarm over her face, biting her. Her body is helpless. Smiling, Klein walks away. Thank you for being my tool, he says to Pale. Pale screams Archimond's name in pain and rage. We see Klein and Dunkel leaving the mine. Klein waves goodbye to Pale. The scene shifts to the Reinlot estate. Klein's father, Heinkel, sits at his desk, reading documents. The Empire let necromancers into the north, and the Holy Order looked the other way. Huh, is that true, Klein? Yes, it's exactly as written, Klein says. Including the undead in the mine and the test subjects, there are about 150 of them. Nearly 30 people are missing from the village we went to. It's probably worse elsewhere. Heinkel turns to the butler. Berkman, dispatch the night order to the locations Klein mentioned. Yes, sir. Should I request reinforcements from the border as well? Send them a letter, Heinkel says. It's better than doing nothing. After that, Heinkel tells Klein, you did good work. Klein shakes his head. It was just luck. If Dunkel hadn't been there, I'd be dead. In his mind, Klein decides that given how complicated the situation is, he and Dunkel should keep the necromancy a secret. That means Dunkel has to keep it too. Heinkel pulls something from his desk drawer. Take this. I'd planned to give you a few more missions, but it doesn't seem necessary now. He places it on the table. This is the token of a Reinlot knight. From now on, you'll start as an apprentice knight. What you've done makes this the least I can do. Oh, it's more than enough, Klein says, smiling. It pleases Heinkel to see it. After all that, you must be exhausted, Heinkel says. Go rest. Thank you, father, Klein says, bowing his head before leaving and closing the door behind him. As soon as he's gone, the butler reads the documents aloud. Over 70 regular undead, a giant-type undead, and even an armed necromancer with Commander Dunkel's combat support. Heinkel cuts him off. Send a letter to my brother, but my lord. Butler asks, I know he's not the type to come for just any reason, so just tell him this. The genius he spent his whole life looking for is here. We see Klein walking proudly with his hands in his pockets. Now I'm an apprentice knight, he says. Unlike the Duke's estate, where outsiders can come and go freely, the place where the knights are stationed is a classified military zone. Even Garrison can't come in without permission. That bastard probably still suspects me. He's likely itching to perform a purification ritual on me by now, but what a shame, he'll never see me again. When he killed Dalton, he decided then and there, Reinlot, I'll restore this family's old glory. All right, he thinks. Now that I'm an apprentice knight, my next step should be, before he can finish, a shadow dashes at him from behind. It's Erin. She grabs him from behind and shouts, Young Master Klein. Klein asks, what's wrong? Did you run out of cookies in your room? Did I break your 7th vertebra? Erin puffs out her cheeks. Do you think cookies are the only thing I care about, young master? Klein tells her to go get more cookies from the kitchen if she wants. Then Erin tells him the real reason she came. Priest Garrison is here. Every painful memory Klein has of Garrison comes rushing back. Before he can think, Garrison's voice comes from behind him. Did your mission go well, young master? Klein breaks out in a cold sweat. He turns to see Garrison say, I've been waiting for you, young Lord Klein Reinlot. Against his will, Klein has to face Garrison again. Voices cut through the air as servants call out desperately across an open field surrounded by trees. They shout for young Master Klein over and over, their voices anxious and urgent. One group reports there is still no sign of him. Another confirms he does not seem to be anywhere around here. They call his name again, louder this time. One of the servants says this is bad, noting that it is the day of the purification ritual and that he cannot believe the young master disappeared like this. Another rushes up and says that Steward Garrison is very angry and that he will forgive Klein if he comes out now. But hidden nearby, Klein crouches low with his wild silver-white hair hanging over his face, smirking to himself and muttering that these guys are going to search all night and never find him. One servant gives the order to check around the mansion first, and the others walk off across the grass. As they disappear into the distance, we see Klein sitting alone close by, his head bowed, hands clasped in his lap. His voice comes out low and sharp as he tells all of them to just get lost. Night falls. The world around Klein goes dark and quiet. He sits somewhere outside making restless sounds, and then suddenly startles hard, jumping to his feet with his hair spiked up and his eyes wide. He catches his breath and wonders out loud if he fell asleep. He figures the servants must have given up by now and decides he should head back. He starts moving, but then something stops him cold. His body freezes and his voice drops to barely a whisper. Northern gray bears, and then we see it. A massive dark creature that fills everything around it, built like a wall of muscle and black fur, its single glowing eye burning yellow in the darkness. Its mouth hangs open with drool falling from its fangs as a deep threatening growl rolls out of its chest. This is the northern gray bear, a large and deadly predator native to the northern region. Klein presses himself back, staring up at it. These creatures have a ferocious temper and claws built for tearing flesh. Klein tells himself that without necromancy, he is nothing but a meal to them right now. He has no choice but to wait until they leave. He crouches in the dark, muttering a curse about this northern weather. Then his thoughts pull inward and grow heavier. He gave everything for the northerners who died without justice. Yet he was reborn into the family of the very man who killed him. And even here his life is nothing but running away. He lets out a long, tired breath. Then the darkness shifts into something else. A massive voice screams that there is Archimand, and the order follows immediately to get him. Dark figures swarm through the black, all of them lunging together toward a single target surrounded on every side. Two shadowy figures stand together watching from above. One of them says that child. The other says they say he is cursed. And below them Klein stands alone under the open night sky, a small pale figure lost in all that darkness. His voice comes out barely audible as he says it is freezing. Then we see his face up close, white hair hanging loose, expression blank and cold. Priest Garrison appears beside him, close and looming, his deep voice asking if Klein froze to death. Klein's thoughts surface slowly, and he wonders out loud if this is hell. Priest Garrison lets out a short laugh and says of course not, that he found Klein unconscious in a tree and brought him here. Klein glances sideways at Priest Garrison carrying him and asks about the gray bears, whether they were already taken care of. Priest Garrison tells him not to worry and that he already dealt with them. Klein's voice sharpens right away. He tells Priest Garrison to put him down, saying he would rather die than be carried by him. Priest Garrison ignores this completely and says Klein is running a fever and to just come along. Klein pulls back and asks with real bitterness why Priest Garrison even saved him. He says if he had just left him there, he would have become food for the bears. Then his voice drops lower and harder as he asks if Priest Garrison was not the one who wanted him dead more than anyone. Priest Garrison says nothing for a moment. Then his voice comes out calm and steady like someone stating a simple truth. He says that stars do not create their own darkness. They merely shine in their own place. And it is the same for young lives. They do not yet know right from wrong. Then we see three small bear cubs tumbling together in the grass under the night sky, round and fluffy, one of them sitting on top of the others with a question mark floating above its tiny head. Priest Garrison's words carry over them as he finishes his thought. He speaks again, saying the future of a young being, and that he has no right to deny that potential. Klein stares at him with a hard, unreadable expression and asks carefully if that is really something Priest Garrison should be saying to him right now. Priest Garrison pauses, then he says, however. He continues that if that being chooses to become darkness itself, and if Klein is the true Archimand he has been looking for, his voice settles into something final. Be careful. A small object cuts through the dark air between them, and then out of that complete darkness the words come slow and heavy, because I will kill you with my own hands. We jump forward in time. Klein stands near a doorway dressed in a fitted black uniform, his dark hair swept back, older and more composed than we have seen him before. Priest Garrison's rough, withered voice speaks from across the room, saying it has been a while, young Master Klein. Klein's expression is quiet but alert as he agrees and says Garrison's name. Priest Garrison sits across from him, broad-shouldered and serious, his face lined and worn. He confirms it has been a while and then says he had some urgent business at the Holy Order and that an old friend there gave him something very interesting. He holds up a small glowing object and Klein's eyes go wide immediately. Klein identifies it with shock, saying that is an ectoplasm, an object that contains spiritual energy, and that it contains his magi. Priest Garrison speaks steadily. He tells Klein that when he was attacked in the forest, a necromancer appeared. And then we see that dark-cloaked necromancer, crouched low in shadow, twisted and menacing. Priest Garrison says he dealt with the necromancer himself, but here is the thing. According to the ectoplasm, the tracker detected not one trace of a necromancer but two. His voice stays completely calm throughout. Klein's eye glows faintly with cold blue light as the weight of those words settles on him. Priest Garrison finishes his thought, speaking of something with countless powerful figures and monsters under its command. Then we see a sharp claw-like shape tear downward in black and white, and below it a single vivid red heart sits in the darkness, lines of motion trailing away beneath it like something being ripped out. Back in the room, the dark silhouette of Archimonde looms behind everything. Klein's thoughts fire fast. Archimonde's instinct is sending him a warning. He asks himself if he can handle this with his current strength. He thinks about using his ability to copy Priest Garrison's technique, but shuts that down immediately. It is impossible. He would need to survive seeing the technique first, and with him just starting to gain real combat experience, facing Priest Garrison right now is completely out of the question. Even if he were to die and wake up again, he still cannot beat him. Priest Garrison's voice comes down like a hammer. He tells Klein to use necromancy right now. Klein stares at him. What? Priest Garrison explains calmly that he is giving Klein a way out of their past ties. If Klein uses basic necromancy, the kind that only controls simple things, it could end with just a report to the Holy Order. But if it is the real personal form of necromancy that actually manipulates souls, a technique tied directly to Archimonde's power, then Klein stares at him waiting for the rest. Priest Garrison finishes it simply. Then you will not escape death. He stands there completely calm, his voice carrying no anger or heat, just cold hard fact. Klein looks up at Archimonde's silhouette looming above. Then Priest Garrison's memory surfaces, a vision of a mage who once stood in the way of the purification ritual, someone who interrupted him at the worst possible moment. Priest Garrison says it is funny, though, that someone he used to know said something very similar to what Klein said. Memory comes in pieces. A voice speaks of the future of children. Priest Garrison says he did not understand what it meant back then. Then comes the future of a young being. He had no right to deny that potential. But when Klein said those same words, Priest Garrison understood for just a moment. He understood that it is the justice Klein believes in, and he knows Klein did not say it just because he hates him. Priest Garrison's voice goes still and cold. He was defeated, and so he died. And we see Archimonde's dark form crashing downward, broken and shattered, collapsing over a small defeated shape lying on the ground below. Then two words sit alone in the silence. But now, Priest Garrison turns to Klein and asks directly if Klein wants him to use necromancy here, and says he will kill him if he does so. Klein snaps back hard. He says no, cut the nonsense. His expression burns with fierce determination. He says he will decide what he becomes. And then with everything he has, he declares it out loud, because he will not run away anymore. Priest Garrison goes quiet. Then he says simply it cannot be helped that he has no choice but to force Klein to use necromancy. His arm swings back with tremendous speed and someone shouts that he is coming. Klein braces hard. His thoughts fire one after another. He has to dodge it somehow, just once, just this one time. Priest Garrison's face is locked on target, jaw tight, eyes cold, the force around him building like a storm as his fist comes tearing down. Klein keeps telling himself that if he can just dodge it this once, just once. Then Klein moves. He throws himself hard to the side, and Priest Garrison's attack tears straight through the empty space where he was standing a breath before. Priest Garrison's eyes go wide. His expression breaks open for just a second, genuine shock passing across his face. Klein's voice comes out breathless. He did it, and then we see total chaos below. Blood covers the ground near a group of people in uniform who scream and ask what is going on. One of them shouts that someone attacked the young master. Priest Garrison's mind sharpens immediately and he tells himself this is his chance, that if he attacks now. But his hand drops and finds nothing. His sword is gone. Then a calm voice from above asks if he is looking for this. Priest Garrison looks up and there stands Heinkel Reinland, tall and dark-skinned in a black military coat, holding Priest Garrison's own sword out with a steady grip, the blade catching the light from the chandelier above. Klein crouches low beside him. Then a dark cloaked figure drops fast from above. Klein registers it instantly. A necromancer using a sword, exactly as he feared. His eyes sharpen as he realizes the necromancer intends to kill him right here. But Heinkel speaks first, telling Klein he does not need something like that. Heinkel moves. The sword swings out with enormous force and a massive burst of power tears through the air. A wall explodes outward in fire and smoke and flying stone. The crash is total, debris scattering in every direction as the shockwave destroys everything in its path. The room keeps shaking. Explosion after explosion rings out, smoke filling every corner. Then someone coughs hard again and again. A voice shouts to call the guards immediately. Klein stares through the haze and turns to face Priest Garrison, asking him to explain what Heinkel has just done. And then Heinkel draws his sword fully, the blade gleaming clean and sharp. He turns and we see him for the first time up close. Golden hair falling loose around sharp features, a short beard, and two brilliant blue eyes burning with cold and absolute focus. His voice comes out steady as steel as he says before his sword cuts you down. He is Heinkel Reinland, the 7th Duke of the Reinland family. The tension hits immediately as Heinkel Reinlant stands with his sword at the ready, his piercing blue eyes locked forward, and demands an explanation from Garrison. His voice is cold and direct. He tells Garrison to explain what he just did, and to do it before his sword cuts him down. Garrison stands there, visibly caught off guard, and barely manages to get out a single word in response. But before he can say anything more, a sharp sound cuts through the air and Klein, who has been watching the whole exchange, dodges to the side. Landing near the golden floor markings, Klein looks composed despite everything. He thinks to himself that it all went exactly as expected. Everything is going according to plan. The sound of boots hitting the floor echoes as guards flood into the area. Someone shouts for the guards to take their positions. The armored soldiers rush in, and another voice calls out, "Over there." The guards close in quickly, swords raised with a clear order. "Protect His Grace the Duke and the young master." Knight Dunkel, standing nearby in his white shirt, reacts with sharp eyes and calls out in alarm, "That's them." Klein watches the knights arrive and thinks calmly. He notes that knights are highly sensitive to hostility and bloodlust. With that in mind, he reasons that if he stalls just a little longer, Heinkel and the Rhineland knights will come running. After all, the opponent is an agent, Garrison. Garrison stands his ground as the golden energy pattern beneath him hums with power. Heinkel's voice comes again, firm and measured, asking once more, was Garrison trying to attack Klein? Garrison's face is tight. Heinkel continues, reminding him that the young master used necromancy, and that surely Garrison knows what that means. He then points out plainly that there is no law prohibiting necromancy anywhere on the continent except in the Holy Kingdom. Heinkel's expression is serious and controlled as he delivers what comes next. Garrison must know better than anyone what necromancy means for the young master. Garrison only needs to look at Klein to understand the weight of that truth. Then Heinkel drops his voice lower and says what has clearly been building inside him. Klein suffered for 7 years because of a baseless rumor. He says he can no longer let it continue. And then with full certainty he adds, besides, he is his father. He will no longer allow anyone to lay a hand on his son. Garrison looks at Heinkel and then lets out a slow warning. If Heinkel does not want Rhineland as his enemy, he should suppress his bloodlust. He doesn't finish the sentence, because Garrison suddenly breaks into laughter. A wild, rising laugh. Heinkel goes still. Klein's eyes snap open in surprise. The laughter echoes louder and louder, uncontrolled, almost manic. Then Garrison's voice shifts into something darker, reciting what sounds like religious doctrine. He speaks of letting there be no shame in faith. He says not to entrust the heart to the tongue of an unbeliever. He swears before God and then declares it, show no mercy to the heretic. His face shifts completely. His eyes glow pale. His expression is no longer that of a composed priest. It is something feral and burning. A burst of golden light explodes outward. The energy rips through the air. A dark figure, Heinkel, stands in its path, raising his sword to meet it. The clash is violent. More bursts of light follow. Heinkel fights through it, sword cutting through the golden energy. The impact tears across the floor and through the surrounding structure. Garrison clenches both fists. Golden light coils around his arms, his body crackling with power as he tightens his grip. His eyes burn. A voice warns, Your Grace, it's dangerous. The knights surge in, but the force of Garrison's power slams into them, sending them stumbling back. One calls out to not approach carelessly. Everything crackles and shakes. Then it happens. Heinkel's fist crashes down and the floor cracks beneath it. The knights scramble. A voice rings out, the mansion is collapsing. Everyone watch out. Klein is in the air now, dark energy swirling around him, red light cutting through the chaos. He moves fast, sword in hand, diving into the battle. The clash between him and Garrison sends a shockwave bursting outward. Heinkel surges forward and delivers what he calls a final warning, lower your fist, agent. Then Garrison declares it with full force, this is divine judgment, Rhineland. He drives his foot into the ground, shattering the floor beneath him and unleashes a massive burst of golden divine power. And Garrison charges toward Heinkel at full speed. Heinkel also moves forward to fight Garrison, sword in hand, and channels a red aura into his blade, attaching energy to it. The red energy attack shoots straight toward Garrison, who's rushing in with golden energy surging around him. Seeing the red energy coming at him, Garrison readies his fist and lands a powerful punch with all his strength. The clash between Garrison's punch and Heinkel's sword energy releases an incredibly bright light. Garrison destroys Heinkel's attack with his fist alone, and without stepping back, keeps advancing straight toward Heinkel. Seeing that, Heinkel tosses his coat aside so he can fully commit to the fight. Then Garrison prepares another powerful attack against Heinkel, a fist strike called Strike of Condemnation, and an intensely bright golden energy pours from it. Heinkel glances at Klein standing behind him. Klein is completely shocked by all of this. Seeing him, Heinkel gets even more serious. Eyes fierce, sword drawn, and the blade of the Rhineland family's secret technique activates. Heinkel opens eye, bloodied and sharp, and an intense aura begins to rise from his body. Dark red energy surges around him. He swings his sword and it cuts clean through Garrison's attack. And then we see it, the Rhineland family's secret technique, meteor sword, second form. Heinkel moves and the blade streaks like a falling star, cutting through the red-soaked darkness. The impact blasts outward in a brilliant flash of light that tears the remaining area apart. Even the knights and Dunkel standing there are pushed back by the sheer force of the attack. The floor breaks as dust and debris explode around them. Klein is watching this massive fight too, groaning, his body battered. He thinks to himself, wait, things are getting complicated. Then a small voice cuts through the dust and the chaos. Stop, Aaron is there. The little red-haired girl stands in the middle of it all, her voice clear and full of feeling. She calls out, please stop. Seeing her, Heinkel and Garrison immediately halt. The MC is also shocked to suddenly see Aaron there. Dunkel reacts instantly, eyes wide, Aaron. He shouts that it's dangerous and tells her to get out of there. Then Garrison's voice comes, quiet and controlled. He asks Aaron directly, why on earth are you there? Aaron walks forward, her little shoes stepping through the wreckage. And then she looks at Garrison and says calmly, Father Garrison. Garrison stops. His hand goes still. There's a beat of silence. Aaron looks up at him with those wide red eyes and tells him he promised to bring her a present when he came back. Everyone freezes. Dunkel stares blankly. Klein stares. The knights stare. A question mark practically floats in the air. Klein's face goes flat with absolute confusion. Aaron tells Garrison very seriously, yes, a present. He definitely promised to buy her one. She lists what she wanted and reminds him that heaven punishes liars. Klein watches her with disbelief and thinks to himself that being this completely oblivious to the atmosphere is almost a talent. Garrison, standing amidst the rubble of the partially destroyed mansion, pauses and then quietly says, ah yes, he did. He reaches into his coat and rummages around and pulls out a small box of cookies from a famous bakery on 3rd Avenue in Royal Gate. He hands them to Aaron. Aaron's eyes go wide. She lets out a soft "oh" and takes a bite. Her expression melts. She chews with happy little sounds, then she lights up completely and exclaims that it is so delicious. But little Aaron says to Father Garrison, but what about yours, Father? Garrison tells Aaron that when he was small, he was raised in a place where even getting a drop of water to drink was hard, and eating food was hard too. None of his friends who were there with him survived to adulthood, and the name of that place was the Archimand cult. Then we see Heinkel, and behind him the MC. The MC is extremely shocked to hear the name Archimand cult and thinks, Archimand cult, did I create this cult? No, I have no memory of such a thing, even in my past life. Then we see Priest Garrison again as he continues speaking and says that's why Garrison has to put an end to everything related to Archimand, the one who ruined his life and took his friends away from him, even if it costs him his own life. Then Garrison says to Aaron with a calm smile, Aaron, please eat and enjoy my share too because that is all I can do. Klein watches all of this happen in the middle of a battlefield and thinks that seeing her like this makes all of that life or death drama feel completely pointless. Then Garrison looks toward Klein and his expression becomes something different. He says Klein's name and then adds that next time it won't end like this. He turns and walks away through the wreckage, his dark figure fading into the dust. Klein watches him go. The area around them is destroyed. Guards stand scattered across the debris. There is silence. Klein lets out a breath. Phew. His thoughts turn immediately to the situation. Making an enemy of Garrison Bierkman of all people, he can't let that happen again. The man's full name is now confirmed in his mind. And he also knows that when Garrison said, next time, he meant he was coming back to kill him. In the end, they will keep chasing each other until one of them gives up. Then Aaron pops up right beside him, still holding the cookies, and offers him a bite too, asking if the young master wants some. Klein jumps and says she startled him. He collects himself quickly. He asks Aaron she likes strawberry cake, right? She says of course she does, absolutely. Klein tells her to go ask the chef to make one and say he sent her. Aaron's eyes go huge and she squeals with delight. He then tells her she can have the whole thing. She nearly explodes with joy. Klein smiles faintly watching her go running. Then he thinks, right, he still has one more hurdle to clear. Heinkel walks past him and speaks quietly. He says it seems they need to speak in private. They move inside the mansion. The chandelier above glows warm in a grand interior room. The two of them walk and Heinkel asks directly, did Klein learn necromancy? Klein answers without hesitation. Yes, he did. Heinkel stops. His voice tightens. He points out that necromancy is the very shackle that bound Klein for 7 years and demands to know why he would learn it. Why of all things did he learn necromancy? How on earth did he even do it? Klein looks at him, calm and steady. He says he learned it from the books in his mother's annex. Heinkel's expression shifts immediately. He repeats the word Claire S. Klein holds still. In his thoughts, he acknowledges that of course that's a lie. But given his background, it's the most believable excuse he has. He tells Heinkel he won't make excuses for keeping it from him, but that necromancy was his only way to survive. Heinkel pushes back, there must have been other ways, even with just his swordsmanship alone. Klein says flatly no. He tells Heinkel to look at the report that Dunkel submitted. He has no mana. He shows flashback moments, battles, near-death situations, impossible odds against monstrous creatures. He says he could never have accomplished any of it with swordsmanship alone. The Empire was using necromancers to eat away at the north, and no one even suspected it. He urges Heinkel to accept what he is before it's too late. Klein's voice takes on a harder edge. He says it's an extreme move, but he has no choice. His goal is the revival of the family. He looks at Heinkel directly and makes his offer, use him as Rhineland's necromancer. He tells Heinkel to make the decision now. If Heinkel truly believes Klein is not the reincarnation of Archimand, will he use Klein to save the family or let them fall to ruin? Heinkel is silent. His face is hard to read. Then Heinkel begins to speak about when Klein first returned to the duchy. The memory surfaces. We see the group standing together inside the hall, Heinkel, Klein, Aaron, Dunkel, and the others. And Heinkel speaks of the moment that struck him most deeply. Even after being locked in the Correctional Institute for 7 years, Klein had come home without a single trace of resentment. He had simply said, "I'm home, Father." Heinkel's voice breaks just slightly as he repeats the word, "Father." Klein had called him that without bitterness, without anger. Klein stands quietly in the warm light of the room, and Heinkel looks at him and speaks the truth in his heart, even though he is a pathetic father who failed to protect Klein's future. He asks Klein, "You've been holding on to all of that this whole time." Klein says he was just excited by the sense of freedom after finally leaving the Correctional Institute. Heinkel turns away from him, his voice quiet and resigned. He says he will not make Klein stop. At this point, he has neither the right nor the reason to do so. So Heinkel says his name and then gives his answer. "Do as you wish." They stand facing each other in that grand room, the golden light falling between them. It's a quiet, heavy moment, a father giving his son permission to walk a dangerous road. Then we pull away to somewhere else entirely. A different figure in a dark place speaks in low tones. It is about time to meet Klein. Could Leia bring him here? A woman is shown, tall, composed, with long hair and a streak of color in it. She is Leia. She answers in a measured voice, understood, Grand Duke Hellion. The silhouette of the woman stands in blue-tinged darkness, her profile calm and unreadable. The next episode is coming, and it will be called The Death Knight. After that, we see a monstrous human slaughtering everyone in sight, leaving nothing but chaos and destruction behind. Bodies are scattered everywhere as terrified people desperately try to escape, but no one is able to stop him. Watching this horrifying scene, one of the soldiers says, "Even our mercenary group is no match for him. Screw it, I don't care anymore." With fear turning into desperation, he grips his sword tightly and charges straight toward the monster, determined to fight even if it costs him his life. However, the moment he reaches his target, the monstrous human casually throws a single punch. The impact is so overwhelming that the soldier is blasted far away, completely unable to defend himself. Seeing their comrade defeated so effortlessly, another member of the group immediately loses his courage and turns around, running for his life without looking back. The monstrous human only laughs at the sight of the fleeing man. He casually picks up a sharp piece of stone, hurls it with incredible force, and the rock tears straight through the escaping man's body, leaving a massive hole as he collapses instantly. Not far from there, a frightened brother and sister are hiding together, completely frozen by fear. The little brother looks at his sister with tears in his eyes and says, "I'm scared, sister. I don't want to die." His sister is trembling just as much and can only cry out, "Please save me." At that very moment, the monstrous human lifts an enormous piece of stone high above his head, preparing to crush them both beneath it. With a cruel grin on his face, he mockingly tells them that there is no need to cry anymore because they should get ready to die. Just as he is about to throw the massive rock, Li Ren suddenly appears from behind him like a flash. She launches a swift attack that forces him away before instantly rushing toward the terrified children. Without wasting another second, she rescues the brother and sister and urgently tells them it's dangerous here, leave this place immediately. Hearing her warning, the two siblings quickly run away as fast as they can, finally escaping the deadly battlefield. The monstrous human wastes no time and immediately charges toward Li Ren, attempting to strike her down. She responds with incredible agility, performing a graceful backflip that allows her to evade the attack perfectly. As she lands, she keeps her eyes locked on her opponent, carefully watching his every movement. Suddenly, the monstrous human disappears from his position and reappears right above her, launching another surprise attack. But Li Ren reacts instantly, encounters with a powerful strike of her own, slashing his hand and drawing blood. Looking at the wound with a smile still spread across his face, the monstrous human says, "You're strong." Those words mark the beginning of an intense battle between the two. Blow after blow, they continue exchanging attacks at incredible speed, and with every passing moment, the fight becomes even more fierce. Gradually, Li Ren begins taking control of the battle, pushing her opponent further onto the defensive. Despite being cornered, the monstrous human never stops smiling. Finally, Li Ren seizes the perfect opportunity and throws her spear with deadly precision. The weapon flies straight through the air before piercing deep into the monstrous human's body. Just then, another man arrives at the scene, looking at everything in disbelief before saying, "This is already the third time this month." The sudden rampages, the superhuman strength, and the man continues speaking. Even the eyewitness reports of those strange veins. Before anyone can make sense of what is happening, everyone realizes that the monster human is still alive. Despite the fatal wound through his body, he slowly speaks with a twisted smile. Anyone can become strong as long as they have that, even stronger than Archimonde from 200 years ago. Hearing those words, Li Ren calmly pulls her spear back out of his body and coldly replies, "No one can ever be Archimonde. He's not someone a bastard like you should even speak of, so whatever that is, I'll find out myself." Her voice carries absolute confidence as the monster human finally collapses. While the mystery surrounding the strange power he mentioned only grows even deeper, the scene then shifts to the Clean's mansion, where everyone is busy cleaning up the massive destruction left behind after the recent battle. Workers can be seen repairing the damaged walls, while servants clear away the piles of broken stone and debris scattered throughout the estate. Looking around at the damage, one worker sighs and says, "I can't believe the wall is still in this state." Another man responds, "Still considering what happened, we got off easy." The person beside him immediately shakes his head and replies, "Got off easy? Are you kidding? If it weren't for His Grace the Duke, the entire mansion would have been blown away." Their conversation quickly attracts another worker, who curiously asks, "By the way, is it true that Aaron rushed in to stop it?" Someone else immediately dismisses the rumor, saying, "No way. What kind of strength could a tiny girl like her have? Must have been my imagination." As they continue talking among themselves, the cleanup of the mansion goes on all around them. At the same time, the cheerful red-haired girl runs through the hallway while happily calling out, "Young master." She enters his room carrying a large stack of books in both arms and excitedly says, "Young master, I brought your books." Cleans is already sitting in his room, surrounded by countless books, completely absorbed in reading. Looking at him, the girl suddenly smiles and says, "You've gotten handsome, young master. If you're handsome, girls won't leave you alone. They'll all get played." Hearing such unexpected words, Cleans looks at her in surprise and asks, "Where on earth did you learn that?" She proudly answers, "I heard the older maids talking about a novel. It's called There's No Way the Prince on a White Horse Would Do." That Cleans lets out a helpless sigh before replying, "Good grief, if you want to read, bring a fairy tale book next time. I'll read it to you, though I might be a bit busy for a while." The narration then explains that it has now been an entire week since Heinkel and Garrison Bierkman clashed. Even though their physical confrontation lasted only for a brief moment, the sheer force released during that single exchange was enough to destroy. The narration explains that the aftermath of the battle was so devastating that the repairs had continued for several days without stopping. And despite all the destruction, Cleans quietly reflects on everything that happened, saying to himself, "If it weren't for Aaron, I would have actually died." But even so, if there's one thing I gained from all of this, before he can continue his thoughts, the door suddenly opens and Dunkel walks into the room. Carrying a large collection of books, he respectfully says, "Young master, the medical books and anatomy texts have arrived." The moment Little Red hears that, she immediately pouts in disappointment and exclaims, What about my fairy tale book?" Ignoring her complaint, Cleans calmly tells Dunkel to place all the books over there. As the books are being arranged, the narration shifts to Cleans' inner thoughts. "Back when I was Archimonde, I worked like a dog as a servant in the magic tower just to learn a single technique formula. I plotted and schemed just to get my hands on a single torn page of a grimoire. And when I was caught trying to steal it, I almost lost my fingers in those days. Knowledge was forbidden to everyone except mages and nobles." He slowly looks around at the mountain of books surrounding him before smiling to himself, "But now I can access any knowledge I want." He immediately begins reading through the anatomy texts, one after another, carefully comparing different theories. "Just as I thought, this hypothesis is wrong. The connection between monocirculation and the human blood vessels has also been completely disproven. And it's already been 100 years since I died. This is the first real thrill I've felt since my reincarnation. Time to cram all of this into my head." While those thoughts continue racing through his mind, Dunkel and Little Red simply stand there silently, staring at him. Their young master has become so completely absorbed in his studies that the way he is flipping through books and muttering to himself almost makes him look possessed. Their confused expressions grow even stranger when Cleans suddenly notices a book lying off to one side. The title catches his attention. Immediately, Ludel Rhineland, before he can continue, reading Dunkel curiously asks, "But young master, why are you collecting so many anatomy books? And what's that paper you're holding?" Cleans casually lifts the paper into the air and replies, "It's a spirit construction formula." The moment they hear those words, both Dunkel and Little Red repeat them in complete surprise. Spirit construction formula. Seeing their confusion, Cleans begins explaining, "You remember the skeleton I summoned, right? If I sprinkle this on it and inject my demonic energy," he pauses for a moment before adding, "my necromancy is a bit unique first. I use my demonic energy to form a contract with a soul, then I use that soul's mana to construct a spirit body." Little Red listens with sparkling eyes before excitedly, saying it's amazing. Cleans nods before continuing his explanation, "But most souls can't form anything more complex than a skeleton. They either lack enough mana or they don't possess a strong enough sense of self to sustain a more advanced spiritual body." Cleans continues explaining his necromancy in greater detail, saying they are solid mana constructs, but their structure is incredibly simple. They can follow basic orders to attack or defend like a soldier, but they would never stand a chance against powerful knights or skilled mana users. That's exactly why I had to deal with Dalton myself. He then pauses for a moment before his expression turns thoughtful as a new idea crosses his mind. "But what if it isn't an ordinary soul?" Hearing that, Dunkel looks at him in confusion and asks, "Not an ordinary soul?" Cleans calmly continues, "For instance, what if that soul belonged to a knight with immense mana?" Dunkel's eyes widen as he immediately realizes what the young master is implying and nervously asks, "Young master, you don't mean?" Before he can finish the question, Cleans reassures him, "Don't worry, I'm not planning to make one anytime soon." Even so, his thoughts continue silently inside his mind. Besides, powerful souls like that aren't easy to come by. You would be lucky to find even one on a massive battlefield, and it's not like I need one right now. Just then the butler enters the room and respectfully bows before, saying, "Young master, an invitation has arrived from Paul Wyvern. They say it is an extremely urgent matter." Hearing the name Paul Wyvern immediately reminds Cleans of someone, and he quietly thinks to himself, "Paul Wyvern, that's Lia's family, come to think of it. She did say something about inviting me if I won the duel." Dunkel immediately finds the situation suspicious and asks, "An urgent matter for you, young master, and not for the Duke?" The butler nods before answering, "It was sent personally by Lady Hellion the Eye." Moment Dunkel hears that name, he is visibly shocked and blurts out, "Wait, did you say Lady Hellion? She married into the collateral branch and completely cut ties. Why is she inviting you to a place crawling with them?" The butler calmly replies, "I know, but she is Duke Heinkel's older sister, and as the mistress of Paul Wyvern, it would be extremely difficult to refuse her invitation." After hearing the entire explanation, Cleans calmly makes his decision and says, "I will go. This actually works out perfectly. I wasn't planning on making that yet, but now I have a reason." To his words suggest that the invitation has unexpectedly given him the perfect opportunity to carry out the next step of whatever plan has been forming inside his mind. The scene then shifts to the middle of the night, when the mansion has fallen completely silent. Everyone else is asleep, while Cleans quietly steps out of his room. Alone, he walks through the dimly lit hallway before stopping in front of a single book. Resting nearby, his eyes settle on the title written across its cover, Ludel Rhineland, the 6th Duke of the Rhineland family. As Cleans continues walking deeper into the silent burial grounds, the narration begins to reveal the history of the man whose grave he has come to visit. Heinkel's father was once hailed as the strongest knight on the entire continent. He was the only duke in history, powerful enough to rival the first Duke Berkel yet. Despite his unmatched strength, he was remembered as a tragic hero who spent his entire life fighting on countless battlefields before meeting an untimely death at a young age looking toward the ancient grave before him. Cleans quietly declares to himself, "I must make him mine." After entering the burial chamber, he slowly looks around, while carefully sensing the lingering spiritual energy in the area. Most of the souls here have already moved on. There isn't even a trace of them left. He pauses for a brief moment before his gaze settles on a single location and his expression becomes serious. But there is one soul that still remains bound to this world by lingering regrets. I can't even imagine what Heinkel would say if he ever found out about this. Without another moment of hesitation, Cleans steps forward and calmly says, "Shall we begin exhuming my own ancestor?" It's our first meeting, but forgive this disrespect, grandfather." He then begins chanting the ritual I call upon the unfortunate soul bound. "By the deeds of your past life and the name of the guide, I shall light your path ahead. If you wish to walk that path, accept this contract." A heavy silence fills the chamber until a powerful voice suddenly echoes through the darkness. "Show yourself, Necromancer." Hearing that voice, Cleans is not surprised at all and quietly thinks to himself, "Just as I expected." The title of former Duke wasn't just for show, he absorbed every last bit of demonic energy. The narration then explains the existence of a Death Knight Ahai, level undead being created by binding the soul of a noble knight to a spiritual vessel. There are only two ways to complete a contract with such a soul. The first is to subjugate it through overwhelming demonic energy, while the second is to earn its willing cooperation. Through mutual agreement, the Death Knight slowly reveals himself before looking directly at Cleans and says, "At first I wondered what business my cute grandson had with me, but to think that the arch-nemesis of the Rhinelands would take over the body of a Rhineland hearing." Those words, Cleans immediately realizes something and thinks to himself, "A soul sees the essence, not the physical form. It's impossible to hide the fact that I am Archimonde." He then calmly explains the entire situation through the contract, including everything that has happened since his reincarnation, believing that the proposal should be more than reasonable. After listening to everything, the Death Knight finally responds, "It's not a bad offer. In fact, I found it quite admirable. But as someone who was once the Duke of Rhineland, how can I so easily trust the arch-nemesis of my own family?" As he finishes speaking, he raises his weapon and points it directly at Cleans, making his intentions perfectly clear without showing even the slightest fear. Cleans stares back at the legendary knight and confidently replies, "Then I shall prove it to you. Proof that my contract is genuine and a promise that I will set you free." They say a knight's trust is forged by the sword, am I wrong? By this point, both of them have already left the burial chamber and stepped into an open area where nothing would interfere with their battle to death. Knight lets out a faint smile before replying, talking about a knight's trust after ripping, "Open your own ancestor's coffin." The very next instant, both warriors unleash their power and charge straight at each other with incredible speed, their weapons aimed directly at one another as an intense battle begins between the legendary Death Knight and the reincarnated Archimonde. Hundreds of years ago, Emperor Meldir pulled together the most powerful nation on the continent, the Empire. His ultimate goal was pretty straightforward. He wanted absolute, total control over every inch of the territory, but there was a massive roadblock standing in his way. The Empire's total domination was constantly being blocked by three incredibly powerful and fiercely independent ducal families, the Fallwyvern out in the west, the Rhineland holding down the north, and the Alassis ruling the east. Because the Empire couldn't just crush them through brute force, they spent generations brewing up a shady alternative plan. At the center of all this scheming is Hellion. She is Heinkel's sister, Leia's stepmother, and the undisputed heavyweight of the Conwell family's corrupt collateral branch. So when a sudden, highly restrictive summons arrives from her, it isn't just an invitation, it's a massive red flag. The story kicks off inside a quiet, dimly lit room. Klein is staring down at this suspicious letter, the faint light catching his bright white hair. He's deep in thought when his loyal knight, Dunkel, calmly walks in and lets him know he's finished organizing the library. Klein barely looks up, thanking him for the hard work, and casually drops a bomb. They need to pack their bags because he is heading out to Fallwyvern in exactly 3 days. Dunkel grabs the document, scanning it with a deep frown. He quickly realizes the catch: the invitation strictly completely bars him from tagging along. Dunkel asks the obvious question, is Klein really going to be okay walking into a snake pit entirely on his own? Klein doesn't sugarcoat it. He flat out admits that it's going to be ridiculously dangerous. One single slip-up, one bad read of the room, and he probably isn't coming back alive. Hearing this, Dunkel is understandably shocked and demands to know why Klein is even risking it. For Klein, the risk is worth the reward. It's the perfect, golden opportunity to figure out what Hellion actually wants, what her demands are, and how the power dynamic is really shifting inside that corrupt collateral branch. Then, with a totally straight face, Klein casually mentions his backup plan. If things start going sideways, he'll just use his necromancy, turn Hellion's own aides into the undead, and force them to tear each other apart. Dunkel is horrified. His knightly pride completely rejects the idea. He pushes back hard, asking Klein how he's any better than the bad guys if he resorts to such twisted, dark magic. He tries to remind Klein of his duty and honor, but Klein bites right back. He asks what could possibly be wrong with doing terrible things to terrible people. He points out the window to the ruined, crumbling state of the main Conwell estate, comparing it to the collateral branch that is living in absolute, absurd luxury off of extorted money. In Klein's eyes, clinging to some outdated code of knightly honor in a broken, corrupt world is just a joke. But Dunkel refuses to back down. He stands tall, insisting that the Rhineland family can never, ever abandon its core principles. Giving up your faith and honor just for survival or profit completely betrays what it means to be a knight. Klein stares at him for a long moment, quietly asking if honor and faith really mean that much to him. Dunkel doesn't hesitate. He looks Klein dead in the eye and tells him that they matter more than anything else in the entire world. Klein just takes that in, letting the heavy words hang in the silent room. Later that night, the scene shifts to an empty training ground bathed in the eerie glow of a bright full moon. Swirling, intense blue flames illuminate the darkness. Klein stands dead center, fully embracing his identity as a dark necromancer, ready to push his absolute limits. He draws his sword and gets into a defensive stance just as a massive, towering spirit made entirely of blue fire lunges at him with terrifying speed. Klein stays ice cold. He reads the enemy's body language in a split second, realizing the opening move is a direct, heavy thrust. He grips his sword tight, bracing himself because he knows a standard thrust is usually followed by an erratic, unpredictable combo. When their blades finally collide, the impact is deafening. A massive shockwave of pink and blue energy ripples through the night air, kicking up dust and debris all around them. The giant spirit actually pauses for a second, genuinely impressed. It marvels at the crazy reality of the situation. A mere necromancer, completely lacking any natural mana, is wielding a sword with the fluid skill of a master. But Klein has a secret. He didn't just practice swinging a stick, he's a genius observer. He spent ages breaking down, analyzing, and memorizing the absolute core mechanics of history's greatest duels. He studied the legendary fight between Delane and Dalton, and the brutal clash between Heinkel and Garrison Bierkman. Now, all he has to do is stitch those stolen, legendary techniques together in real-time combat and perfectly transition between them. The spirit just laughs it off, mocking Klein for being full of openings despite his fancy footwork. Out of nowhere, the fiery giant brings down a devastating overhead strike. It catches Klein completely off guard, and a massive explosion of blue fire obliterates the spot where Klein was just standing. For a second it looks like it's over, but the spirit senses something is wrong and looks up. High above, perfectly silhouetted against the glowing full moon, Klein has leaped dozens of feet into the air. He's positioning himself right behind the giant, fully intending to end the fight with one clean strike to the back. But the spirit is way too fast. It whips around, declaring it won't be taken down that easily, and unleashes a rapid, spinning counterattack that snaps through the air like a whip. Klein barely manages to get his sword up in time, blocking the heavy blow and skidding backward. He lands safely on one knee, breathing hard as a stray magical projectile rips past his cheek. The blue, flaming entity stands tall, radiating a completely overwhelming aura. It is actually stunned that a kid with zero mana and a purely physical body managed to block every single strike. Dripping with sweat from the crazy exertion, Klein looks up with a sharp, knowing smile. He tells the spirit it has decent talent, and then casually drops a name, Rudel Rhineland. The flames suddenly shift and dissipate, revealing the spirit's true, legendary form. Standing before Klein is a massive, towering man decked out in dark, incredibly ornate armor. He has long, flowing blonde hair tied back in a high ponytail, and is gripping a sword that looks way too heavy for a normal human to lift. This is the renowned 6th Duke of the Rhineland family. Back in his day, this guy held the undisputed title of the strongest knight on the entire continent, famous for inventing a completely unique and lethal style of swordsmanship. Rudel smirks, asking Klein if he's been having fun playing house as Heinkel's kid. He laughs, calling Heinkel his own son, but roasts the guy for being incredibly oblivious. Rudel jokes that Heinkel is so bad at reading a room, he would probably have a heart attack and pass out on the spot if he ever found out that the sweet kid he raised was actually the infamous Archimand. Klein listens to this and quietly thinks to himself that a legendary former duke talks an awful lot like a street thug. He mentally notes that Heinkel definitely inherited his total cluelessness from his father. Hearing this unspoken insult, Rudel bursts out laughing, admitting that with that kind of attitude, Klein might actually share his bloodline after all. Hash the phantom sword. But playtime is over. Rudel steps forward and warns Klein that he is about to stop holding back. He triggers his ultimate signature move, the phantom sword style. This is a tragic, insanely complex technique that was completely lost to history because it was just too hard to learn. Instantly, the air is filled with a chaotic, blinding storm of sword strikes. It looks like a dozen blades are swinging at once, making it completely impossible to tell which trajectory is the real threat and which ones are just illusions. Klein braces himself as the overwhelming barrage begins. He knows that every single blade he sees is a deceptive feint, except for one. Realizing he can't trust his eyes, Klein tries to predict the real attack, guessing it'll be a horizontal slash from his right. He swings his sword to parry, but he's dead wrong. It was an elaborate trap. A lightning-fast strike clips him from the left. Trying to recover, Klein completely misreads the erratic follow-up combo, guessing an attack is coming from behind. Instead, a massive, heavy impact slams into his chest, sending him flying backward across the dirt. Klein hits the ground hard, coughing up blood, but he manages to push himself back up. He is genuinely amazed by how terrifying the Phantom Sword actually is. He also realizes that the sheer volume of mana pouring out of Rudol's spirit form is exactly the same as a living, breathing knight in their prime. Rudol flexes a bit, telling Klein never to underestimate the pure, brutal efficiency of northern swordsmanship. He brags that this technique was so insanely difficult that even his own biological kids couldn't figure it out, which means a squishy necromancer has absolutely zero chance. Wiping the blood off his chin, Klein just flashes a cocky smile. He admits he didn't plan on revealing his trump card this early in the game, but he boldly claims that after seeing the technique up close just once, it really doesn't seem that hard to copy. Rudol is furious at the sheer disrespect. He snaps that the Phantom Sword isn't some parlor trick you can just mimic, but before he can finish his sentence, Klein proves him wrong. In a mind-blowing display of raw talent, both Klein and Rudol unleash the Phantom Sword technique at the exact same time. The training ground explodes into a blinding storm of overlapping, illusory blades, their swords clashing over and over again in a deafening shower of sparks. During this intense, relentless trade of blows, Rudol yells over the sparks, demanding to know why a selfish necromancer would ever go out of his way to help the family of his sworn enemy. And right at that moment, Klein does something crazy. He deliberately drops his guard and allows Rudol's blade to connect. Rudol completely halts his assault in shock. He asks Klein what he's doing, pointing out that Klein clearly had enough room to dodge. Klein just looks at him, totally calm despite the hit. He finally answers Dunkel's earlier question. Klein confesses that, having lived his whole past life as a necromancer, he genuinely used to think that concepts like honor and loyalty were completely pathetic and a waste of time. But recently, he watched someone endure absolute, agonizing pain and still choose to sacrifice themselves just to protect the future of the kids. Seeing that changed him. Klein admits that he now wants to see that promised future for himself, and he doesn't care what anyone else thinks about it. Rudol listens closely, his hardened expression softening. He admits that the only reason he is stuck in this world as a lingering spirit is because of his own massive, unresolved regrets. He isn't going to spill his guts and say what those regrets are, but he figures that the answers he's looking for might just be waiting in the future that Klein is fighting for. With a serious, booming voice, Rudol Reinlant formally agrees to make a contract. Klein smiles, telling the old duke that fixing unresolved regrets is basically his day job, but Rudol puts a finger up, reminding Klein to read the fine print. He wants a fair, mutual agreement, not a master and servant deal. Klein tries to be lazy about it, casually suggesting they just use a standard subordinate contract because it's way faster. Rudol immediately shoots that down. He laughs, saying that if Klein turned his own glorious ancestor into a literal mind-controlled slave, it would officially make Klein a supervillain. Klein chuckles, appreciating the fact that the old ghost actually has some self-awareness. They get down to business and recite the sacred words of the vow together. Rudol officially entrusts all of his lingering, centuries-old resentment to the guide, and Klein, acting under his true moniker, Archimand, formally accepts the heavy burden. The binding ritual lights up the night with an intense, blinding magical glow. The terms lock into place, officially sealing Rudol as Klein's loyal sword until both of their ultimate desires are fulfilled. The Death Knight contract is complete. Looking at Rudol's newly bound, glowing spectral form, Klein pokes fun at him, asking if the old man can handle the weird physical side effects of being a Death Knight. Rudol stretches out his arms, noting that he feels perfectly fine. Klein just laughs, teasing him for being a ghost that worries way too much about the living. Now fully powered up and backed by a legendary spirit, Klein says it's finally time to hit the road and pay their respects to his dear Aunt Hellion. Meanwhile, miles away from all this intense magical drama, little Erin is safely tucked into her bed, fast asleep. The room is dead quiet until she starts mumbling incoherently, tossing and turning while whispering something about a Death Knight. Suddenly, her eyes snap wide open. She sits straight up in bed, looking absolutely horrified, and screams at the top of her lungs, "Teriyaki cookie." And then, just as quickly as she woke up, the panic vanishes. She instantly flops straight back down onto her pillow, completely out cold, snoring softly as if absolutely nothing happened.